Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Snowman, adapted and enlarged in the spirit of Hans Christian Andersen. "It is delightfully cold," said the Snowman, standing proud and still in the middle of the frozen garden. "The frost bites so sweetly that it makes my whole body crackle. This is the perfect sort of wind, the kind that fills a snow creature with life. Ah, but what is that enormous red eye staring down at me from the sky?" He was speaking of the sun, which had sunk low and now blazed upon the horizon like a fiery ember. "It glares at me most rudely," muttered the Snowman. "I shall not blink. No, not one piece of me shall melt beneath that stare." His head was crowned with 2 shards of tile for eyes, and a broken rake served as his mouth, complete with jagged teeth. The boys who had built him shouted merrily, their laughter mixing with the jingle of sleigh bells and the sharp whistle of whips over the snow. In that chorus of winter joy, the Snowman had awakened to awareness. The sun slipped away, and a great round moon rose in its place, pale and full, sailing slowly across a sky as blue as steel. "There, it has returned already," said the Snowman in wonder. "But I have taught it not to stare. Now it glides gently, giving me light enough to admire myself. If only I could move. I should love to slide across the ice as the boys do. Yet my legs refuse me. I do not even know how to run." "Run away, away," barked an old yard dog, whose voice was cracked with age. He had once lived in comfort by a warm hearth, but since being chained outside, his voice had grown hoarse and harsh. "The sun will make you run one day. I've seen it happen to your kind before. Each of you ends up running off, puddle by puddle, away, away." "I don't understand you, friend," said the Snowman. "Do you mean that glowing thing in the sky? Is it to teach me how to run? I saw it racing earlier, and now it creeps back from the other side." "You know nothing," rasped the yard dog. "You've only just been patched together from frost. That shining disk is the moon. The one before it was the sun. It will come again tomorrow, and when it does, you'll learn all about running, straight into the ditch by the well. Mark my words, there's a change in the weather coming. My left hind leg aches, always a sure sign." The Snowman tilted his tiled eyes, trying to follow this. "I do not like the sound of that," he thought. "The creature who stared at me earlier, that burning one, he is no friend of mine." The dog gave another rough bark of "away, away," turned round 3 times, and crept into his kennel, sighing himself to sleep. And indeed, the weather changed. By dawn, a heavy fog lay across the countryside, and a wind so sharp blew that the air itself seemed made of glass. When the sun finally rose, the world glistened as if remade. Trees and bushes were wrapped in silver hoar frost, every twig hung with crystals. What had been hidden by green leaves in summer now stood revealed. Every curve, every lace-fine branch etched in white. The whole garden looked as though carved from pearl and coral. Where the light struck, the snow flashed like diamonds scattered by invisible hands. The birch trees, quivering in the wind, looked alive, and the fields sparkled with so many tiny suns that one could hardly bear to look. "This is truly beautiful," said a young girl who had come into the garden with her companion. They stopped beside the snowman, marveling at the splendor. "Not even summer can rival this," she whispered, her cheeks glowing. "And summer can't give us a fellow like this one," laughed the young man, pointing to the snowman. "He's magnificent, solid as a knight in armor." The girl laughed, curtsied playfully toward the snowman, and skipped away, her boots creaking on the frozen snow like new starch. "Who are those two?" asked the snowman, turning stiffly toward the dog. "You have been here longer than I. Do you know them?" "Of course I know them," growled the dog. "The girl has stroked my back many a time, and the lad has tossed me bones. I never bite them. They are good creatures." "But what kind of beings are they?" asked the snowman, puzzled. "They are lovers," said the yard dog, yawning. "They'll soon live together, sharing one kennel and gnawing the same bone. That's how it goes. Away, away." "Are they like you and me?" asked the snowman curiously. "In a way," replied the dog. "We all serve the same master after all. But you were born only yesterday, so you know nothing of the world. I have age and wisdom. Once I too lived inside, warm and grand, but that was long ago." He rattled his chain gloomily. "The cold is delightful," said the snowman. "But do tell me more, only please don't clank your chain. It sends shivers through me." "Away, away," barked the dog, but he went on talking, half pleased to have a listener. "I was quite the darling once. The mistress called me Ami, sweet Ami, pretty Ami. They wiped my paws with embroidered napkins and kissed my nose. I slept in a velvet chair beside the fire. Then I grew too large, they said, and they sent me to the housekeeper's room below. Still, it wasn't bad. I had my cushion and my stove. Ah, the stove, finest thing in the world. I'd crawl right beneath it, close my eyes, and dream of paradise." "Does a stove look beautiful?" asked the snowman, eager. "Is it anything like me?" "Quite the opposite," said the dog. "It's black as coal, with a long neck and a shiny brass knob. It eats wood and spits fire, but it gives warmth, real warmth. You can see it through the window there." The snowman turned his tiled eyes toward the house. Through the frosted pane, he saw a gleam, a polished shape glowing with quiet fire. Something stirred within his icy chest, a strange, melting longing. He could not name it, yet he felt it deeply. "And why did you ever leave it?" he asked softly. "How could you abandon such a place, such a creature?" "I had no choice," said the dog. "I bit the master's son when he kicked away my bone. They chained me out here. Since then, I bark at the moon and dream of my stove. Away, away." But the snowman scarcely heard him. He stood staring through the window, enchanted. Inside, the stove stood upon 4 iron legs, about his own height, glowing softly. "What is this crackling inside me?" he whispered. "I long to go to her, to rest beside her warmth. Surely that cannot be wrong. If I must break the window to reach her, so be it." "Never go near her," warned the dog. "If you do, you'll melt to nothing. Away, away." "I may melt already," murmured the snowman, "but I must see her again." All day he stood watching the window, and as evening fell, the room seemed even more inviting. The stove shimmered red within, her glow spreading like a secret heartbeat. When the door of the stove opened, a tongue of flame leapt forth, and the light fell across the snowman's face, painting him with color for the first time. "How beautifully she shines," sighed the snowman. "How sweetly she breathes fire." The night passed slowly for the rest of the world, but not for him. He stood dreaming, lost in a warmth he could never touch. By morning, the window panes were covered with intricate flowers of ice, the loveliest any snowman could wish for. Yet they hid his beloved stove from view. The air was colder than ever, but he no longer rejoiced in it. How could he? He was sick with yearning, stove sick, as the dog called it. "That's a dangerous illness for our kind," said the dog, shaking his head. "I've felt it myself, but I got over it. The weather will change soon. Mark my words." And so it did. A thaw set in. Day by day the air grew softer, and the snowman shrank. He said nothing. He only leaned a little more, quietly fading. One morning he was gone. Only a broomstick stood where he had been, the pole around which the boys had built him. "Ah," said the yard dog, sniffing. "Now I understand his longing. That pole, it's the very shovel used to tend the stove. No wonder the poor fellow yearned for her." He gave a rough, hoarse bark. "But it's all over now. Away, away." The winter soon passed. The snow melted, the sun grew gentle, and the girls in the house sang sweetly at the open window. "Come, gentle sun, while the cuckoo sings, the willow wakes, and the green time springs. The lark shall rise on joyful wings. O sweet return of wandering spring." And no one thought again of the snowman who had loved the stove. The little green ones? A rose tree drooped sadly in the window, its branches once vibrant and adorned with blooms, now appearing frail and weary. Not long ago, it had been a vision of life, its leaves shimmering in the sun, its flowers opening wide to the morning light. But now, something was clearly amiss. A curious army had claimed it as their own, a regiment of tiny invaders, each clad in immaculate green uniforms, moving with precision along the stems and petals. I leaned closer to observe and, by chance, spoke to one of these green soldiers. Astonishingly, he was only 3 days old, yet already a grandfather, carrying the wisdom of his lineage in his minuscule frame. And what he told me? Oh, every word of it rang true. He spoke of himself, his comrades, and the grand design of their lives. Listen well, for the tale is as strange as it is marvelous. We are without doubt the most peculiar regiment of creatures to grace this earth. Our young are born in the gentle warmth of summer, when the days are long and pleasant. Betrothals are immediate, and weddings follow swiftly, as if dictated by the sun itself. When the cold winds arrive, we lay our eggs with care, tucking them away where they remain snug and safe, wrapped in warmth and security. The ant, that sagacious observer of the natural world, has studied us closely and holds us in the highest regard. He does not devour us heedlessly. Rather, he collects our eggs, arranges them meticulously in the chambers of his anthill, labeling and numbering them layer upon layer. Each day, a tiny life emerges from this ordered treasure trove, and the cycle continues. We, the Green Regiment, are tended with astonishing care, kept in stables, pinched, milked, and eventually we pass away. Yet it is not sorrow, but joy, for our lives are purposeful and celebrated. The ants, in their wisdom, have bestowed upon us the most charming name, Little Milch Cows. He paused a moment, his tiny antennae twitching, and I could sense both pride and indignation in his voice. All creatures of discernment, those who truly understand nature, call us by this respectful title. But humans, alas, possess no such wisdom. They brand us with a name so cruel, so utterly vile, that it would embitter any soul to hear it. Could you, kind observer, not write a protest on our behalf? Could you not correct these misguided humans, teach them respect? They peer at us with envious eyes, shaking their heads in disapproval merely because we eat the tender leaves of a rose. Yet they themselves consume all that grows and flourishes, heedless of care or artistry. They dare give us a name so grotesque, so abhorrent, that even speaking it makes my very heart quiver. But no, I shall not utter it, not while in uniform, which I wear with unbroken pride for every moment of my existence. He leaned closer, as if to share a secret. I was born upon a rose leaf, and so was my regiment. The rose tree sustains us, yet we too give life to it, for we are creatures of a higher order in our own way. Humans, however, despise us. They approach with soapsuds, that dreadful, bitter drink intending to destroy us. Even now I can smell the horror of it in the air. Imagine being born not for bathing, yet forced to endure it by beings so blind to the beauty of your life. Humans, consider your place and ours. Witness our elegant methods of reproduction, the care with which we rear our young, the artistry with which we live our brief, purposeful lives. We are born on roses and die upon them. Our existence is a living poem, delicate and fragrant. Call us not by the cruel names of your own making, but by the name the ants have given us, the milch cows of the rose tree, the brave little green regiment. I, the observer, stood rooted in wonder, gazing at the drooping tree and its diligent occupants, my heart softened by their plea. I had come armed with soap and water, intending to wash them away, yet I could not bring myself to do it. Instead, I would let the soap suds become playful bubbles, shimmering in the sunlight. Ah, what a spectacle! Each bubble swelled with iridescent colors, reflecting the roses, the green soldiers, and the very air around them. One bubble grew so perfectly round and radiant that it seemed to hold a silver pearl within its fragile sphere. It swayed gently in the breeze, drifted toward the open door, and pop! It burst with a soft, tinkling whisper, and lo! The door swung wide, and there she stood, Mother Fairy Tale herself, resplendent and wise, her eyes twinkling with mirth and knowledge. She gazed at the tiny creatures, then turned to me with a gentle smile. "Yes, yes," she said, "you may marvel at their lives, but do not fear the truth. You must call things by their proper names." And so, those delicate, industrious little beings, the green soldiers of the rose tree, are known in the ordinary world as tree lice. Do not shrink from reality, even in a fairy tale, for truth has its own magic, and respect for life is the highest enchantment of all. 12 by the mail. It was very frosty, starry, clear weather, quiet and calm. Bump! A pot was thrown against a door. Bang! Fireworks were shot off to welcome the new year, for it was New Year's Eve, and now the clock struck 12. Trataratra! There came the mail. The big mail coach stopped outside the gate to the town. It carried 12 people, and couldn't hold more, for all the seats were taken. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" rang out in the houses, where people were celebrating New Year's Eve. They arose with full glasses and drank a toast to the new year. "Health and good wishes for the new year," they said. a pretty little wife, lots of money, an end to nonsense. Yes, these were their wishes for one another, and glasses were struck together, while the mail coach stopped in front of the town gate with the unknown guests, the 12 travelers. What kind of people were they? They had passports and luggage with them. Yes, even presents for you and me, and for all the people in the town. Who were these strangers? What did they want, and what did they bring? "Good morning," they said to the sentry at the town gate. "Good morning," said he, as the clock had struck 12. "Your name? Your profession?" asked the sentry when the first of them stepped out of the carriage. "Look in the passport," said the man. "I am myself." And a splendid-looking fellow he was, too, dressed in a bear skin and fur boots. "I am the man on whom many people pin their hopes. Come to see me tomorrow, and I'll give you a real new year. I throw dollars and cents about, give presents, and, yes, I even give balls, 31 of them. That's all the nights I have to spare. My ships are frozen tight, but in my office it is warm. I am a merchant, and my name is January. I have only bills." Then came the second. He was a comedian, a theatrical director, the manager of masked balls, and all the amusements you could think of. His luggage consisted of a great barrel. "We'll beat the cat out of the barrel at carnival time," he said. "I'll amuse others and myself too, for I have the shortest time to live of the whole family. I get to be only 28 days old. Yes, sometimes they throw in an extra day, but that doesn't make much difference. Hurrah!" "You must not shout so loud," said the sentry. "Yes, I may," said the man. "I am Prince Carnival, and traveling under the name of February." Now came the third. He looked very much like fasting itself, but strutted proudly, for he was related to the 40 Nights, and was a weather prophet. But that is hardly fattening employment, and for that reason he approved of fasting. He had a cluster of violets in his buttonhole, but they were very small. "March, march," shouted the fourth and pushed the third. "March, march, into the guardroom. There's punch there. I can smell it." But it wasn't true. He only wanted to make an April fool of him. Thus the fourth began his career in the town. He looked very jolly, did little work, and had lots of holidays. "Good humor one day and bad the next," he said. "Rain and sunshine, moving out and moving in. I am also moving day commissioner. I am an undertaker. I can both laugh and cry. I have summer clothes in my trunk, but it would be very foolish to use them now. Here I am. When I dress up, I wear silk stockings and carry a muff." Now a lady came out of the carriage. Miss May, she called herself, and wore summer clothes and overshoes. She had on a beech-tree green silk dress and anemones in her hair, and she was so scented with wild thyme that the sentry had to sneeze. "God bless you," she said, and that was her greeting. She was beautiful, and she was a singer, not of the theater, but a singer of the woodlands, not at county fairs. No, she roamed through the fresh, green forest and sang there for her own entertainment. In her handbag she had a copy of Christian Winther's woodcuts, which were like the beech-tree forest itself, and also little poems by Richard, which were like the wild thyme. "Now comes the mistress, the young mistress," shouted those inside the carriage. And then out came the lady, young and delicate, proud and pretty. You could easily see that she was born to be a lady of leisure. She gave a great feast on the longest day of the year, so that her guests might have time to eat the many dishes of food at her table. She could afford to ride in a carriage of her own, but still she traveled in the mail coach like the others, for she wanted to show she wasn't too proud. But she didn't travel alone. With her was her elder brother, July. He was a well-fed fellow, in attire and with a Panama hat. He had but little baggage with him, because it was a nuisance in the heat. He had brought only his bathing cap and swimming trunks. That isn't much. Now came the mother, Madame Auguste, a wholesale fruit dealer, proprietor of many fish tanks and landowner, wearing a great crinoline. She was fat and hot, and took an active part in everything. She herself even carried beer out to the workmen in the fields. "In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread," she said. "That is written in the Bible. Afterward we can have the picnics and dances in the woods and the harvest festivals." Such was the mother. Now again came a man, a painter by profession, a master of colors. As the forest soon learned, the leaves had to change their colors, but how beautifully, whenever he wished it. Soon the wood glowed with red, yellow, and brown. The painter whistled like the black starling bird, and was a brisk worker. He wound the brown-green hop plants around his beer jug, which decorated it beautifully. Indeed, he had an eye for decorating. There he stood with his color pot, and that was all the luggage he had. Now followed a land proprietor who was thinking of the grain month, of the plowing and preparing of the land, and yes, also a little of the pleasures of field sports. He had his dog and his gun, and he had nuts in his game bag. Crack, crack. He had an awful lot of baggage with him, and even an English plow. And he talked about farming, but you couldn't hear much of what he said because of the coughing and gasping. It was November coming. He had a cold, such a violent cold, that he used a bedsheet instead of a handkerchief. And yet he had to accompany the servant girls and initiate them into their winter service, he said. But his cold would go when he went out woodcutting, which he had to do, because he was master sawyer for the Firewood Guild. His evenings he spent cutting soles for skates, knowing that in a few weeks there would be good use for these amusing shoes. Now came the last passenger, a little old mother with her firepot. She was cold, but her eyes sparkled like two bright stars. She carried a flower pot with a little fir tree growing in it. "I shall guard and nurse this tree, so that it may grow large by Christmas Eve and reach from the ground right up to the ceiling, and be covered with lighted candles, golden apples, and little cut-out paper decorations. This fire kettle warms like a stove." I take the storybook from my pocket and read aloud, so that all the children in the room become quiet, but the dolls on the tree come to life, and the little wax angel on top of the tree shakes its golden tinsel wings, flies down from the green top, and kisses in the room. Yes, the poor children too, who stand outside and sing the Christmas carol about the Star of Bethlehem. "And now the coach can drive again," said the sentry. "We have the 12. Let another coach drive up." "First let the 12 come inside," said the captain of the guard. "One at a time. I'll keep the passports. Each is good for a month. When that has passed, I'll write a report of their behavior on each passport. Be so good, Mr. January. Please step inside." And in he went. "When a year has passed, I shall be able to tell you what the 12 have brought you, me, and all of us. I don't know it now, and they probably don't know it themselves, for these are strange times we live in." Little Ida's flowers. "My poor flowers are quite dead," said little Ida. "They were so pretty yesterday evening, and now all the leaves are hanging down quite withered." "What do they do that for?" she asked of the student who sat on the sofa. She liked him very much. He could tell the most amusing stories and cut out the prettiest pictures. Hearts and ladies dancing, castles with doors that opened, as well as flowers. He was a delightful student. "Why do the flowers look so faded today?" she asked again, and pointed to her nosegay, which was quite withered. "Don't you know what is the matter with them?" said the student. "The flowers were at a ball last night, and therefore it is no wonder they hang their heads." "But flowers cannot dance?" cried little Ida. "Yes, indeed they can," replied the student. "When it grows dark and everybody is asleep, they jump about quite merrily. They have a ball almost every night. Can children go to these balls?" "Yes," said the student, "little daisies and lilies of the valley." "Where do the beautiful flowers dance?" asked little Ida. "Have you not often seen the large castle outside the gates of the town, where the king lives in summer, and where the beautiful garden is full of flowers? And have you not fed the swans with bread when they swam towards you? Well, the flowers have capital balls there, believe me." "I was in the garden out there yesterday with my mother," said Ida, "but all the leaves were off the trees, and there was not a single flower left." "Where are they? I used to see so many in the summer." "They are in the castle," replied the student. "You must know that as soon as the king and all the court are gone into the town, the flowers run out of the garden into the castle, and you should see how merry they are. The two most beautiful roses seat themselves on the throne, and are called the king and queen. Then all the red coxcombs range themselves on each side and bow. These are the lords in waiting. After that, the pretty flowers come in, and there is a grand ball. The blue violets represent little naval cadets, and dance with hyacinths and crocuses, which they call young ladies. The tulips and tiger lilies are the old ladies who sit and watch the dancing, so that everything may be conducted with order and propriety." "But," said little Ida, "is there no one there to hurt the flowers for dancing in the king's castle?" "No one knows anything about it," said the student. "The old steward of the castle, who has to watch there at night, sometimes comes in. But he carries a great bunch of keys, and as soon as the flowers hear the keys rattle, they run and hide themselves behind the long curtains, and stand quite still, just peeping their heads out. Then the old steward says, 'I smell flowers here,' but he cannot see them." "Oh, how capital," said little Ida, clapping her hands. "Should I be able to see these flowers?" "Yes," said the student. "Mind you think of it the next time you go out. No doubt you will see them, if you peep through the window. I did so today, and I saw a long yellow lily lying stretched out on the sofa. She was a court lady." "Can the flowers from the botanical gardens go to these balls?" asked Ida. "It is such a distance." "Oh yes," said the student, "whenever they like, for they can fly. Have you not seen those beautiful red, white, and yellow butterflies that look like flowers? They were flowers once. They have flown off their stalks into the air and flapped their leaves as if they were little wings to make them fly. Then, if they behave well, they obtain permission to fly about during the day, instead of being obliged to sit still on their stems at home, and so in time their leaves become real wings. It may be, however, that the flowers in the botanical gardens have never been to the king's palace, and, therefore, they know nothing of the merry doings at night, which take place there. I will tell you what to do, and the botanical professor who lives close by here will be so surprised. You know him very well, do you not?" Well, next time you go into his garden, you must tell one of the flowers that there is going to be a grand ball at the castle. Then that flower will tell all the others, and they will fly away to the castle as soon as possible. And when the professor walks into his garden, there will not be a single flower left. How he will wonder what has become of them. But how can one flower tell another? Flowers cannot speak? No, certainly not, replied the student. But they can make signs. Have you not often seen that when the wind blows, they nod at one another and rustle all their green leaves? Can the professor understand the signs? Asked Ida. Yes, to be sure he can. He went one morning into his garden and saw a stinging nettle making signs with its leaves to a beautiful red carnation. It was saying, "You are so pretty. I like you very much." But the professor did not approve of such nonsense, so he clapped his hands on the nettle to stop it. Then the leaves, which are its fingers, stung him so sharply that he has never ventured to touch a nettle since. "Oh, how funny," said Ida, and she laughed. "How can anyone put such notions into a child's head?" said a tiresome lawyer who had come to pay a visit and sat on the sofa. He did not like the student and would grumble when he saw him cutting out droll or amusing pictures. Sometimes it would be a man hanging on a gibbet and holding a heart in his hand, as if he had been stealing hearts. Sometimes it was an old witch riding through the air on a broom and carrying her husband on her nose. But the lawyer did not like such jokes, and he would say, as he had just said, "How can anyone put such nonsense into a child's head? What absurd fancies there are!" But to little Ida, all these stories which the student told her about the flowers seemed very droll, and she thought over them a great deal. The flowers did hang their heads because they had been dancing all night and were very tired, and most likely they were ill. Then she took them into the room where a number of toys lay on a pretty little table, and the whole of the table drawer besides was full of beautiful things. Her doll Sophie lay in the doll's bed asleep, and little Ida said to her, "You must really get up, Sophie, and be content to lie in the drawer tonight. The poor flowers are ill, and they must lie in your bed. Then perhaps they will get well again." So she took the doll out, who looked quite cross and said not a single word, for she was angry at being turned out of her bed. Ida placed the flowers in the doll's bed and drew the quilt over them. Then she told them to lie quite still and be good, while she made some tea for them, so that they might be quite well and able to get up the next morning. And she drew the curtains close round the little bed, so that the sun might not shine in their eyes. During the whole evening, she could not help thinking of what the student had told her, and before she went to bed herself, she was obliged to peep behind the curtains into the garden where all her mother's beautiful flowers grew, hyacinths and tulips, and many others. Then she whispered to them quite softly, "I know you are going to a ball tonight." But the flowers appeared as if they did not understand, and not a leaf moved. Still, Ida felt quite sure she knew all about it. She lay awake a long time after she was in bed, thinking how pretty it must be to see all the beautiful flowers dancing in the king's garden. "I wonder if my flowers have really been there," she said to herself, and then she fell asleep. In the night, she awoke. She had been dreaming of the flowers and of the student, as well as of the tiresome lawyer who found fault with him. It was quite still in Ida's bedroom. The night lamp burnt on the table, and her father and mother were asleep. I wonder if my flowers are still lying in Sophie's bed, she thought to herself. How much I should like to know. She raised herself a little and glanced at the door of the room where all her flowers and playthings lay. It was partly open, and as she listened, it seemed as if someone in the room was playing the piano, but softly and more prettily than she had ever before heard it. Now all the flowers are certainly dancing in there, she thought. Oh, how much I should like to see them. But she did not dare move for fear of disturbing her father and mother. If they would only come in here, she thought. But they did not come, and the music continued to play so beautifully and was so pretty that she could resist no longer. She crept out of her little bed, went softly to the door, and looked into the room. Oh, what a splendid sight there was, to be sure. There was no night lamp burning, but the room appeared quite light, for the moon shone through the window upon the floor and made it almost like day. All the hyacinths and tulips stood in 2 long rows down the room. Not a single flower remained in the window, and the flower pots were all empty. The flowers were dancing gracefully on the floor, making turns and holding each other by their long green leaves as they swung round. At the piano sat a large yellow lily, which little Ida was sure she had seen in the summer, for she remembered the student saying she was very much like Miss Lena, one of Ida's friends. They all laughed at him then, but now it seemed to little Ida as if the tall, yellow flower was really like the young lady. She had just the same manners while playing, bending her long yellow face from side to side and nodding in time to the beautiful music. Then she saw a large purple crocus jump into the middle of the table where the playthings stood, go up to the doll's bedstead, and draw back the curtains. There lay the sick flowers, but they got up directly and nodded to the others as a sign that they wished to dance with them. The old rough doll with the broken mouth stood up and bowed to the pretty flowers. They did not look ill at all now, but jumped about and were very merry, yet none of them noticed little Ida. Presently, it seemed as if something fell from the table. Ida looked that way and saw a slight carnival rod jumping down among the flowers as if it belonged to them. It was, however, very smooth and neat, and a little wax doll with a broad-brimmed hat on her head, like the one worn by the lawyer, sat upon it. The carnival rod hopped about among the flowers on its 3 red, stilted feet and stamped quite loud when it danced the mazurka. The flowers could not perform this dance. They were too light to stamp in that manner. All at once, the wax doll which rode on the carnival rod seemed to grow larger and taller, and it turned round and said to the paper flowers, "How can you put such things in a child's head? They are all foolish fancies." And then the doll was exactly like the lawyer with the broad-brimmed hat, and looked as yellow and as cross as he did. But the paper dolls struck him on his thin legs, and he shrunk up again and became quite a little wax doll. This was very amusing, and Ida could not help laughing. The carnival rod went on dancing, and the lawyer was obliged to dance also. It was no use. He might make himself great and tall, or remain a little wax doll with a large black hat. Still, he must dance. Then at last the other flowers interceded for him, especially those who had lain in the doll's bed, and the carnival rod gave up his dancing. At the same moment a loud knocking was heard in the drawer, where Ida's doll, Sophie, lay with many other toys. Then the rough doll ran to the end of the table, laid himself flat down upon it, and began to pull the drawer out a little way. Then Sophie raised himself and looked round, quite astonished. "There must be a ball here tonight," said Sophie. "Why did not somebody tell me?" "Will you dance with me?" said the rough doll. "You are the right sort to dance with, certainly," said she, turning her back upon him. Then she seated herself on the edge of the drawer and thought that perhaps one of the flowers would ask her to dance, but none of them came. Then she coughed, "Hem, hem, ahem." But for all that not one came. The shabby doll now danced quite alone, and not very badly after all. As none of the flowers seemed to notice Sophie, she let herself down from the drawer to the floor so as to make a very great noise. All the flowers came round her directly and asked if she had hurt herself, especially those who had lain in her bed. But she was not hurt at all, and Ida's flowers thanked her for the use of the nice bed and were very kind to her. They led her into the middle of the room where the moon shone and danced with her, while all the other flowers formed a circle round them. Then Sophie was very happy and said they might keep her bed. She did not mind lying in the drawer at all. But the flowers thanked her very much and said, "We cannot live long. Tomorrow morning we shall be quite dead, and you must tell little Ida to bury us in the garden near to the grave of the canary. Then, in the summer, we shall wake up and be more beautiful than ever." "No, you must not die," said Sophie as she kissed the flowers. Then the door of the room opened, and a number of beautiful flowers danced in. Ida could not imagine where they could come from, unless they were the flowers from the king's garden. First came 2 lovely roses, with little golden crowns on their heads. These were the king and queen. Beautiful stalks and carnations followed, bowing to everyone present. They had also music with them. Large poppies and peonies had pea shells for instruments, and blew into them till they were quite red in the face. The bunches of blue hyacinths and the little white snowdrops jingled their bell-like flowers, as if they were real bells. Then came many more flowers, blue violets, purple heartsease, daisies, and lilies of the valley, and they all danced together and kissed each other. It was very beautiful to behold. At last, the flowers wished each other good night. Then little Ida crept back into her bed again and dreamt of all she had seen. When she arose the next morning, she went quickly to the little table to see if the flowers were still there. She drew aside the curtains of the little bed. There they all lay, but quite faded, much more so than the day before. Sophie was lying in the drawer where Ida had placed her, but she looked very sleepy. "Do you remember what the flowers told you to say to me?" said little Ida. But Sophie looked quite stupid and said not a single word. "You are not kind at all," said Ida, "and yet they all danced with you." Then she took a little paper box on which were painted beautiful birds and laid the dead flowers in it. "This shall be your pretty coffin," she said, "and by, when my cousins come to visit me, they shall help me to bury you out in the garden, so that next summer you may grow up again more beautiful than ever." Her cousins were 2 good-tempered boys, whose names were James and Adolphus. Their father had given them each a bow and arrow, and they had brought them to show Ida. She told them about the poor flowers which were dead, and as soon as they obtained permission, they went with her to bury them. The 2 boys walked first, with their crossbows on their shoulders, and little Ida followed, carrying the pretty box containing the dead flowers. They dug a little grave in the garden. Ida kissed her flowers, and then laid them, with the box, in the earth. James and Adolphus then fired their crossbows over the grave, as they had neither guns nor cannons. The Goloshes of Fortune, a beginning. In a house in Copenhagen, not far from the king's new market, a very large party had assembled, the host and his family expecting, no doubt, to receive invitations in return. One half of the company were already seated at the card tables. The other half seemed to be waiting the result of their hostess's question. Well, how shall we amuse ourselves? Conversation followed, which, after a while, began to prove very entertaining. Among other subjects, it turned upon the events of the Middle Ages, which some persons maintained were more full of interest than our own times. Counselor Knapp defended this opinion so warmly that the lady of the house immediately went over to his side, and both exclaimed against Ørsted's essays on ancient and modern times, in which the preference is given to our own. The counselor considered the times of the Danish king, Hans, as the noblest and happiest. The conversation on this topic was only interrupted for a moment by the arrival of a newspaper, which did not, however, contain much worth reading. And while it is still going on, we will pay a visit to the anteroom, in which cloaks, sticks, and goloshes were carefully placed. Here sat two maidens, one young and the other old, as if they had come and were waiting to accompany their mistresses home. But on looking at them more closely, it could easily be seen that they were no common servants. Their shapes were too graceful, their complexions too delicate, and the cut of their dresses much too elegant. They were two fairies. The younger was not Fortune herself, but the chambermaid of one of Fortune's attendants, who carries about her more trifling gifts. The elder one, who was named Care, looked rather gloomy. She always goes about to perform her own business in person, for then she knows it is properly done. They were telling each other where they had been during the day. The messenger of Fortune had only transacted a few unimportant matters. For instance, she had preserved a new bonnet from a shower of rain, and obtained for an honest man a bow from a titled nobody, and so on. But she had something extraordinary to relate after all. "I must tell you," said she, "that today is my birthday, and in honor of it I have been entrusted with a pair of goloshes to introduce amongst mankind. These goloshes have the property of making everyone who puts them on imagine himself in any place he wishes, or that he exists at any period. Every wish is fulfilled at the moment it is expressed, so that for once mankind have the chance of being happy." "No," replied Care. "You may depend upon it that whoever puts on those goloshes will be very unhappy, and bless the moment in which he can get rid of them." "What are you thinking of?" replied the other. "Now, see, I will place them by the door. Someone will take them instead of his own, and he will be the happy man." This was the end of their conversation. What happened to the counselor? It was late when Counselor Knapp, lost in thought about the times of King Hans, desired to return home, and fate so ordered it that he put on the Goloshes of Fortune instead of his own, and walked out into the East Street. Through the magic power of the goloshes, he was at once carried back 300 years to the times of King Hans, for which he had been longing when he put them on. Therefore he immediately set his foot into the mud and mire of the street, which in those days possessed no pavement. "Why, this is horrible. How dreadfully dirty it is," said the counselor, "and the whole pavement has vanished, and the lamps are all out. The moon had not yet risen high enough to penetrate the thick, foggy air, and all the objects around him were confused together in the darkness. At the nearest corner, a lamp hung before a picture of the Madonna, but the light it gave was almost useless, for he only perceived it when he came quite close, and his eyes fell on the painted figures of the mother and child. "That is most likely a museum of art," thought he, "and they have forgotten to take down the sign." Two men in the dress of olden times passed by him. "What odd figures," thought he. "They must be returning from some masquerade." Suddenly he heard the sound of a drum and fifes, and then a blazing light from torches shone upon him. The counselor stared with astonishment as he beheld a most strange procession pass before him. First came a whole troop of drummers, beating their drums very cleverly. They were followed by lifeguards with long bows and crossbows. The principal person in the procession was a clerical-looking gentleman. The astonished counselor asked what it all meant and who the gentleman might be. "That is the Bishop of Zealand." "Good gracious," he exclaimed. "What in the world has happened to the bishop? What can he be thinking about?" Then he shook his head and said, "It cannot possibly be the bishop himself." While musing on this strange affair, and without looking to the right or left, he walked on through East Street and over High Bridge Place. The bridge, which he supposed led to Palace Square, was nowhere to be found, but instead he saw a bank and some shallow water, and two people who sat in a boat. "Does the gentleman wish to be ferried over the Holme?" asked one. "To the Holme," exclaimed the counselor, not knowing in what age he was now existing. "I want to go to Christian's Haven in Little Turf Street." The men stared at him. "Pray tell me where the bridge is," said he. "It is shameful that the lamps are not lighted here, and it is as muddy as if one were walking in a marsh." But the more he talked with the boatmen, the less they could understand each other. "I don't understand your outlandish talk," he cried at last, angrily turning his back upon them. He could not, however, find the bridge nor any railings. "What a scandalous condition this place is in," said he. Never, certainly, had he found his own times so miserable as on this evening. "I think it will be better for me to take a coach, but where are they?" There was not one to be seen. "I shall be obliged to go back to the King's New Market," said he, "where there are plenty of carriages standing, or I shall never reach Christian's Haven." Then he went towards East Street and had nearly passed through it when the moon burst forth from a cloud. "Dear me, what have they been erecting here?" he cried as he caught sight of the East Gate, which in olden times used to stand at the end of East Street. However, he found an opening through which he passed and came out upon where he expected to find the New Market. Nothing was to be seen but an open meadow, surrounded by a few bushes, through which ran a broad canal or stream. A few miserable-looking wooden booths for the accommodation of Dutch watermen stood on the opposite shore. "Either I behold a fata morgana, or I must be tipsy," groaned the counselor. "What can it be? What is the matter with me?" He turned back in the full conviction that he must be ill. In walking through the street this time, he examined the houses more closely. He found that most of them were built of lath and plaster, and many had only a thatched roof. "I am certainly all wrong," said he with a sigh, "and yet I only drank 1 glass of punch, but I cannot bear even that, and it was very foolish to give us punch and hot salmon. I shall speak about it to our hostess, the agent's lady. Suppose I were to go back now and say how ill I feel. I fear it would look so ridiculous, and it is not very likely that I should find anyone up." Then he looked for the house, but it was not in existence. "This is really frightful. I cannot even recognize East Street. Not a shop to be seen. Nothing but old, wretched, tumble-down houses, just as if I were at Roskilde or Ringstedt. Oh, I really must be ill. It is no use to stand upon ceremony. But where in the world is the agent's house? There is a house, but it is not his, and people still up in it I can hear. Oh dear, I certainly am very queer." As he reached the half-open door, he saw a light and went in. It was a tavern of the olden times, and seemed a kind of beer shop. The room had the appearance of a Dutch interior. A number of people, consisting of seamen, Copenhagen citizens, and a few scholars, sat in deep conversation over their mugs and took very little notice of the newcomer. "Pardon me," said the counselor, addressing the landlady. "I do not feel quite well, and I should be much obliged if you will send for a fly to take me to Christian's Haven." The woman stared at him and shook her head. Then she spoke to him in German. The counselor supposed from this that she did not understand Danish. He therefore repeated his request in German. This, as well as his singular dress, convinced the woman that he was a foreigner. She soon understood, however, that he did not find himself quite well, and therefore brought him a mug of water. It had something of the taste of seawater, certainly, although it had been drawn from the well outside. Then the counselor leaned his head on his hand, drew a deep breath, and pondered over all the strange things that had happened to him. "Is that today's number of the day?" he asked, quite mechanically, as he saw the woman putting by a large piece of paper. She did not understand what he meant, but she handed him the sheet. It was a woodcut representing a meteor which had appeared in the town of Cologne. "That is very old," said the counselor, becoming quite cheerful at the sight of this antique drawing. "Where did you get this singular sheet? It is very interesting, although the whole affair is a fable. Meteors are easily explained in these days. They are northern lights, which are often seen, and are no doubt caused by electricity. Gee, those who sat near him and heard what he said looked at him in great astonishment, and one of them rose, took off his hat respectfully, and said in a very serious manner, 'You must certainly be a very learned man, monsieur.' 'Oh no,' replied the counselor. 'I can only discourse on topics which everyone should understand.' 'Modestia is a beautiful virtue,' said the man. 'Moreover, I must add to your speech mihi secus videtur, yet in this case I would suspend my judicium. May I ask to whom I have the pleasure of speaking?' 'I am a bachelor of divinity,' said the man. This answer satisfied the counselor. The title agreed with the dress. 'This is surely,' thought he, 'an old village schoolmaster, a perfect original, such as one meets with sometimes even in Jutland.' 'This is not certainly a locus docendi,' began the man. 'Still I must beg you to continue the conversation. You must be well read in ancient lore.' 'Oh yes,' replied the counselor. 'I am very fond of reading useful old books, and modern ones as well, with the exception of everyday stories, of which we really have more than enough.' 'Everyday stories?' asked the bachelor. 'Yes, I mean the new novels that we have at the present day.' 'Oh,' replied the man with a smile. 'And yet they are very witty, and are much read at court. The king likes especially the romance of Messrs. Ivan and Gaudian, which describes King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. He has joked about it with the gentlemen of his court." "Well, I have certainly not read that," replied the counselor. "I suppose it is quite new and published by Heiberg." "No," answered the man. "It is not by Heiberg. Godfred von Gaiman brought it out." "Oh, is he the publisher? That is a very old name," said the counselor. "Was it not the name of the first publisher in Denmark?" "Yes, and he is our first printer and publisher now," replied the scholar. So far, all had passed off very well, but now one of the citizens began to speak of a terrible pestilence, which had been raging a few years before, meaning the plague of 1484. The counselor thought he referred to the cholera, and they could discuss this without finding out the mistake. The war in 1490 was spoken of as quite recent. The English pirates had taken some ships in the Channel in 1801, and the counselor, supposing they referred to these, agreed with them in finding fault with the English. The rest of the talk, however, was not so agreeable. Every moment one contradicted the other. The good bachelor appeared very ignorant, for the simplest remark of the counselor seemed to him either too bold or too fantastic. They stared at each other, and when it became worse, the bachelor spoke in Latin, in the hope of being better understood. But it was all useless. "How are you now?" asked the landlady, pulling the counselor's sleeve. Then his recollection returned to him. In the course of conversation, he had forgotten all that had happened previously. "Goodness me, where am I?" said he. It bewildered him as he thought of it. "We will have some claret, or mead, or Bremen beer," said one of the guests. "Will you drink with us?" Two maids came in. One of them had a cap on her head of two colors. They poured out the wine, bowed their heads, and withdrew. The counselor felt a cold shiver run all over him. "What is this? What does it mean?" said he. But he was obliged to drink with them, for they overpowered the good man with their politeness. He became, at last, desperate, and when one of them said he was tipsy, he did not doubt the man's word in the least, only begged them to get a droshky. And then they thought he was speaking the Muscovite language. Never before had he been in such rough and vulgar company. "One might believe that the country was going back to heathenism," he observed. "This is the most terrible moment of my life." Just then it came into his mind that he would stoop under the table and so creep to the door. He tried it, but before he reached the entry, the rest discovered what he was about and seized him by the feet, when, luckily for him, off came the goloshes, and with them vanished the whole enchantment. The counselor now saw quite plainly a lamp and a large building behind it. Everything looked familiar and beautiful. He was in East Street, as it now appears. He lay with his legs turned towards a porch, and just by him sat the watchman asleep. "Is it possible that I have been lying here in the street dreaming?" said he. "Yes, this is East Street. How beautifully bright and gay it looks. It is quite shocking that one glass of punch should have upset me like this." 2 minutes afterwards he sat in a droshky, which was to drive him to Christian's Haven. He thought of all the terror and anxiety which he had undergone, and felt thankful from his heart for the reality and comfort of modern times, which, with all their errors, were far better than those in which he so lately found himself. The Watchman's Adventures. "Well, I declare, there lies a pair of goloshes," said the watchman. "No doubt they belong to the lieutenant who lives upstairs. They are lying just by his door." Gladly would the honest man have rung and given them in, for a light was still burning. But he did not wish to disturb the other people in the house, so he let them lie. "These things must keep the feet very warm," said he. "They are of such nice, soft leather." Then he tried them on, and they fitted his feet exactly. "Now," said he, "how droll things are in this world. There's that man can lie down in his warm bed, but he does not do so. There he goes, pacing up and down the room. He ought to be a happy man. He has neither wife nor children, and he goes out into company every evening. Oh, I wish I were he, then I should be a happy man." As he uttered this wish, the goloshes which he had put on took effect, and the watchman at once became the lieutenant. There he stood in his room, holding a little piece of pink paper between his fingers, on which was a poem written by the lieutenant himself. Who has not had, for once in his life, a moment of poetic inspiration? And at such a moment, if the thoughts are written down, they flow in poetry. The following verses were written on the pink paper. "Oh, were I rich! Oh, were I rich! How oft in youth's bright hour, when youthful pleasures banish every care, I longed for riches but to gain a power, the sword and plume and uniform to wear. The riches and the honor came for me, yet still my greatest wealth was poverty. Ah, help and pity me. Once in my youthful hours, when gay and free, a maiden loved me, and her gentle kiss, rich in its tender love and purity, taught me, alas, too much of earthly bliss. Dear child, she only thought of youthful glee. She loved no wealth, but fairy tales and me. Thou knowest, ah, pity me. Oh, were I rich! Again is all my prayer. That child is now a woman, fair and free, as good and beautiful as angels are. Oh, were I rich in lover's poetry, to tell my fairy tale, love's richest lore. But no, I must be silent. I am poor. Ah, wilt thou pity me? Oh, were I rich in truth and peace below, I need not then my poverty bewail. To thee I dedicate these lines of woe. Wilt thou not understand the mournful tale? A leaf on which my sorrows I relate, dark story of a darker night of fate. Ah, bless and pity me. Well, yes, people write poems when they are in love, but a wise man will not print them. A lieutenant in love, and poor. This is a triangle, or more properly speaking, the half of the broken die of fortune. The lieutenant felt this very keenly, and therefore leaned his head against the window frame and sighed deeply. "The poor watchman in the street," said he, "is far happier than I am. He knows not what I call poverty. He has a home, a wife and children, who weep at his sorrow and rejoice at his joy. Oh, how much happier I should be could I change my being and position with him and pass through life with his humble expectations and hopes. Yes, he is indeed happier than I am." At this moment, the watchman again became a watchman, for having, through the Goloshes of Fortune, passed into the existence of the lieutenant and found himself less contented than he expected, he had preferred his former condition and wished himself again a watchman. "Ah, that was an ugly dream," said he, "but droll enough. It seemed to me as if I were the lieutenant up yonder, but there was no happiness for me. I missed my wife and the little ones, who are always ready to smother me with kisses." He sat down again and nodded, but he could not get the dream out of his thoughts, and he still had the goloshes on his feet. A falling star gleamed across the sky. "There goes one," cried he. "However, there are quite enough left. I should very much like to examine these a little nearer, especially the moon, for that could not slip away under one's hands. The student, for whom my wife washes, says that when we die we shall fly from one star to another. If that were true, it would be very delightful. But I don't believe it. I wish I could make a little spring up there now. I would willingly let my body lie here on the steps. Yeah, there are certain things in the world which should be uttered very cautiously, doubly so when the speaker has on his feet the Goloshes of Fortune. Now we shall hear what happened to the watchman. Nearly everyone is acquainted with the great power of steam. We have proved it by the rapidity with which we can travel, both on a railroad or in a steamship across the sea. But this speed is like the movements of the sloth or the crawling march of the snail, when compared to the swiftness with which light travels. Light flies 19 million times faster than the fleetest racehorse, and electricity is more rapid still. Death is an electric shock which we receive in our hearts, and on the wings of electricity, the liberated soul flies away swiftly. The light from the sun travels to our earth 95 millions of miles in 8 minutes and a few seconds. But on the wings of electricity, the mind requires only a second to accomplish the same distance. The space between the heavenly bodies is, to thought, no farther than the distance which we may have. To walk from one friend's house to another in the same town. Yet this electric shock obliges us to use our bodies here below, unless, like the watchman, we have on the Goloshes of Fortune. In a very few seconds, the watchman had traveled more than 200,000 miles to the moon, which is formed of a lighter material than our earth, and may be said to be as soft as new fallen snow. He found himself on one of the circular range of mountains, which we see represented in Dr. Madler's large map of the moon. The interior had the appearance of a large hollow, bowl-shaped, with a depth about half a mile from the brim. Within this hollow stood a large town. We may form some idea of its appearance by pouring the white of an egg into a glass of water. The materials of which it was built seemed just as soft, and pictured forth cloudy turrets and sail-like terraces, quite transparent and floating in the thin air. Our earth hung over his head like a great dark red ball. Presently he discovered a number of beings, which might certainly be called men, but were very different to ourselves. A more fantastical imagination than Herschel's must have discovered these. Had they been placed in groups and painted, it might have been said, "What beautiful foliage!" They had also a language of their own. No one could have expected the soul of the watchman to understand it, and yet he did understand it. For our souls have much greater capabilities than we are inclined to believe. Do we not in our dreams show a wonderful dramatic talent? Each of our acquaintance appears to us then in his own character and with his own voice. No man could thus imitate them in his waking hours. How clearly, too, we are reminded of persons whom we have not seen for many years. They start up suddenly to the mind's eye with all their peculiarities as living realities. In fact, this memory of the soul is a fearful thing. Every sin, every sinful thought it can bring back, and we may well ask how we are to give account of every idle word that may have been whispered in the heart or uttered with the lips. The spirit of the watchman therefore understood very well the language of the inhabitants of the moon. They were disputing about our earth and doubted whether it could be inhabited. The atmosphere, they asserted, must be too dense for any inhabitants of the moon to exist there. They maintained that the moon alone was inhabited, and was really the heavenly body in which the old world people lived. They likewise talked politics. But now we will descend to East Street and see what happened to the watchman's body. He sat lifeless on the steps. His staff had fallen out of his hand, and his eyes stared at the moon, about which his honest soul was wandering. "What is it o'clock, watchman?" inquired a passenger. But there was no answer from the watchman. The man then pulled his nose gently, which caused him to lose his balance. The body fell forward and lay at full length on the ground as one dead. All his comrades were very much frightened, for he seemed quite dead. Still, they allowed him to remain after they had given notice of what had happened. And at dawn, the body was carried to the hospital. We might imagine it to be no jesting matter if the soul of the man should chance to return to him, for most probably it would seek for the body in East Street without being able to find it. We might fancy the soul inquiring of the police, or at the address office, or among the missing parcels, and then at length finding it at the hospital. But we may comfort ourselves by the certainty that the soul, when acting upon its own impulses, is wiser than we are. It is the body that makes it stupid. As we have said, the watchman's body had been taken to the hospital, and here it was placed in a room to be washed. Naturally, the first thing done here was to take off the goloshes, upon which the soul was instantly obliged to return, and it took the direct road to the body at once, and in a few seconds the man's life returned to him. He declared, when he quite recovered himself, that this had been the most dreadful night he had ever passed. Not for £100 would he go through such feelings again. However, it was all over now. The same day he was allowed to leave, but the goloshes remained at the hospital. The eventful moment. A most unusual journey. Every inhabitant of Copenhagen knows what the entrance to Frederick's Hospital is like, but as most probably a few of those who read this little tale may not reside in Copenhagen, we will give a short description of it. The hospital is separated from the street by an iron railing, in which the bars stand so wide apart that, it is said, some very slim patients have squeezed through and gone to pay little visits in the town. The most difficult part of the body to get through was the head, and in this case, as it often happens in the world, the small heads were the most fortunate. This will serve as sufficient introduction to our tale. One of the young volunteers, of whom, physically speaking, it might be said that he had a great head, was on guard that evening at the hospital. The rain was pouring down, yet in spite of these two obstacles, he wanted to go out just for a quarter of an hour. It was not worthwhile, he thought, to make a confidant of the porter, as he could easily slip through the iron railings. There lay the goloshes, which the watchman had forgotten. It never occurred to him that these could be goloshes of fortune. They would be very serviceable to him in this rainy weather, so he drew them on. Now came the question whether he could squeeze through the palings. He certainly had never tried, so he stood looking at them. "I wish to goodness my head was through," said he, and instantly, though it was so thick and large, it slipped through quite easily. The goloshes answered that purpose very well, but his body had to follow, and this was impossible. "I am too fat," he said. "I thought my head would be the worst, but I cannot get my body through, that is certain." Then he tried to pull his head back again, but without success. He could move his neck about easily enough, and that was all. His first feeling was one of anger, and then his spirits sank below zero. The Goloshes of Fortune had placed him in this terrible position, and unfortunately it never occurred to him to wish himself free. No, instead of wishing, he kept twisting about, yet did not stir from the spot. The rain poured, and not a creature could be seen in the street. The porter's bell he was unable to reach, and however was he to get loose? He foresaw that he should have to stay there till morning, and then they must send for a smith to file away the iron bars, and that would be a work of time. All the charity children would just be going to school, and all the sailors who inhabited that quarter of the town would be there to see him standing in the pillory. What a crowd there would be! "Ha!" he cried. "The blood is rushing to my head, and I shall go mad. I believe I am crazy already. Oh, I wish I were free, then all these sensations would pass off." This is just what he ought to have said at first. The moment he had expressed the thought, his head was free. He started back, quite bewildered with the fright which the Goloshes of Fortune had caused him. But we must not suppose it was all over. No, indeed, there was worse to come. Yet, the night passed, and the whole of the following day, but no one sent for the Goloshes. In the evening, a declamatory performance was to take place at the amateur theater in a distant street. The house was crowded. Among the audience was the young volunteer from the hospital, who seemed to have quite forgotten his adventures of the previous evening. He had on the goloshes. They had not been sent for, and as the streets were still very dirty, they were of great service to him. A new poem entitled "My Aunt's Spectacles" was being recited. It described these spectacles as possessing a wonderful power. If anyone put them on in a large assembly, the people appeared like cards, and the future events of ensuing years could be easily foretold by them. The idea struck him that he should very much like to have such a pair of spectacles, for if used rightly, they would perhaps enable him to see into the hearts of people, which he thought would be more interesting than to know what was going to happen next year. For future events would be sure to show themselves, but the hearts of people never. I can fancy what I should see in the whole row of ladies and gentlemen on the first seat if I could only look into their hearts. That lady, I imagine, keeps a store for things of all descriptions. How my eyes would wander about in that collection. With many ladies, I should no doubt find a large millinery establishment. There is another that is perhaps empty, and would be all the better for cleaning out. There may be some well stored with good articles. Ah, yes, he sighed. I know one, in which everything is solid, but a servant is there already, and that is the only thing against it. I dare say from many I should hear the words, "Please to walk in." I only wish I could slip into the hearts like a little tiny thought. This was the word of command for the goloshes. The volunteer shrunk up together and commenced a most unusual journey through the hearts of the spectators in the first row. The first heart he entered was that of a lady, but he thought he must have got into one of the rooms of an orthopedic institution where plaster casts of deformed limbs were hanging on the walls. With this difference, that the casts in the institution are formed when the patient enters, but here they were formed and preserved after the good people had left. These were casts of the bodily and mental deformities of the lady's female friends, carefully preserved. Quickly he passed into another heart, which had the appearance of a spacious, holy church, with the white dove of innocence fluttering over the altar. Gladly would he have fallen on his knees in such a sacred place. But he was carried on to another heart, still, however, listening to the tones of the organ and feeling himself that he had become another and a better man. The next heart was also a sanctuary, which he felt almost unworthy to enter. It represented a mean garret in which lay a sick mother. But the warm sunshine streamed through the window. Lovely roses bloomed in a little flower box on the roof. 2 bluebirds sang of childlike joys, and the sick mother prayed for a blessing on her daughter. Next, he crept on his hands and knees through an overfilled butcher's shop. There was meat, nothing but meat, wherever he stepped. This was the heart of a rich, respectable man, whose name is doubtless in the directory. Then he entered the heart of this man's wife. It was an old, tumble-down pigeon house. The husband's portrait served as a weathercock. It was connected with all the doors, which opened and shut just as the husband's decision turned. The next heart was a complete cabinet of mirrors, such as can be seen in the castle of Rosenberg. But these mirrors magnified in an astonishing degree. In the middle of the floor sat, like the Grand Lama, the insignificant eye of the owner, astonished at the contemplation of his own features. At his next visit, he fancied he must have got into a narrow needle case full of sharp needles. "Oh," thought he, "this must be the heart of an old maid." But such was not the fact. It belonged to a young officer who wore several orders and was said to be a man of intellect and heart. The poor volunteer came out of the last heart in the row quite bewildered. He could not collect his thoughts and imagined his foolish fancies had carried him away. "Good gracious," he sighed. "I must have a tendency to softening of the brain, and here it is so exceedingly hot that the blood is rushing to my head." And then suddenly recurred to him the strange event of the evening before, when his head had been fixed between the iron railings in front of the hospital. "That is the cause of it all," he exclaimed. "I must do something in time. A Russian bath would be a very good thing to begin with. I wish I were lying on one of the highest shelves." Sure enough, there he lay on an upper shelf of a vapor bath, still in his evening costume, with his boots and goloshes on, and the hot drops from the ceiling falling on his face. "Ho!" he cried, jumping down and rushing towards the plunging bath. The attendant stopped him with a loud cry when he saw a man with all his clothes on. The volunteer had, however, presence of mind enough to whisper, "It is for a wager." But the first thing he did when he reached his own room was to put a large blister on his neck and another on his back, that his crazy fit might be cured. The next morning his back was very sore, which was all he gained by the Goloshes of Fortune. The clerk's transformation. The watchman, whom we of course have not forgotten, thought after a while of the goloshes which he had found and taken to the hospital, so he went and fetched them. But neither the lieutenant nor anyone in the street could recognize them as their own, so he gave them up to the police. "They look exactly like my own goloshes," said one of the clerks, examining the unknown articles as they stood by the side of his own. "It would require even more than the eye of a shoemaker to know one pair from the other." "Master clerk," said a servant who entered with some papers. The clerk turned and spoke to the man. But when he had done with him, he turned to look at the goloshes again. And now he was in greater doubt than ever as to whether the pair on the right or on the left belonged to him. "Those that are wet must be mine," thought he, but he thought wrong. It was just the reverse. The Goloshes of Fortune were the wet pair, and besides, why should not a clerk in a police office be wrong sometimes? So He drew them on, thrust his papers into his pocket, placed a few manuscripts under his arm, which he had to take with him, and to make abstracts from at home. Then, as it was Sunday morning and the weather very fine, he said to himself, "A walk to Fredericksburg will do me good." So away he went. There could not be a quieter or more steady young man than this clerk. We will not grudge him this little walk. It was just the thing to do him good after sitting so much. He went on at first like a mere automaton, without thought or wish. Therefore, the goloshes had no opportunity to display their magic power. In the avenue, he met with an acquaintance, one of our young poets, who told him that he intended to start on the following day on a summer excursion. "Are you really going away so soon?" asked the clerk. "What a free, happy man you are. You can roam about where you will, while such as we are tied by the foot." "But it is fastened to the bread tree," replied the poet. "You need have no anxiety for the morrow, and when you are old, there is a pension for you." "Ah, yes, but you have the best of it," said the clerk. "It must be so delightful to sit and write poetry. The whole world makes itself agreeable to you, and then you are your own master. You should try how you would like to listen to all the trivial things in a court of justice." The poet shook his head, so also did the clerk. Each retained his own opinion, and so they parted. "They are strange people, these poets," thought the clerk. "I should like to try what it is to have a poetic taste and to become a poet myself. I am sure I should not write such mournful verses as they do. This is a splendid spring day for a poet. The air is so remarkably clear, the clouds are so beautiful, and the green grass has such a sweet smell. For many years I have not felt as I do at this moment." We perceive by these remarks that he had already become a poet. By most poets, what he had said would be considered commonplace, or as the Germans call it, insipid. It is a foolish fancy to look upon poets as different to other men. There are many who are more the poets of nature than those who are professed poets. The difference is this: the poet's intellectual memory is better. He seizes upon an idea or a sentiment until he can embody it clearly and plainly in words, which the others cannot do. But the transition from a character of everyday life to one of a more gifted nature is a great transition, and so the clerk became aware of the change after a time. "What a delightful perfume," said he. "It reminds me of the violets at Aunt Laura's. Ah, that was when I was a little boy. Dear me, how long it seems since I thought of those days. She was a good old maiden lady. She lived yonder, behind the exchange. She always had a sprig or a few blossoms in water, let the winter be ever so severe. I could smell the violets, even while I was placing warm penny pieces against the frozen panes to make peepholes, and a pretty view it was on which I peeped. Out in the river lay the ships, ice-bound and forsaken by their crews. A screaming crow represented the only living creature on board. But when the breezes of spring came, everything started into life. Amidst shouting and cheers, the ships were tarred and rigged, and then they sailed to foreign lands. I remain here, and always shall remain, sitting at my post at the police office and letting others take passports to distant lands. Yes, this is my fate." And he sighed deeply. Suddenly he paused. "Good gracious, what has come over me? I never felt before as I do now. It must be the air of spring. It is overpowering, and yet it is delightful." He felt in his pockets for some of his papers. "These will give me something else to think of," said he. Casting his eyes on the first page of one, he read, Mistress Sigbirth, an original tragedy in 5 acts. What is this? In my own handwriting, too. Have I written this tragedy? He read again. The Intrigue on the Promenade, or The Fast Day, a vaudeville. However did I get all this? Someone must have put them into my pocket. And here is a letter. It was from the manager of a theater. The pieces were rejected, not at all in polite terms. Hem, said he, sitting down on a bench. His thoughts were very elastic, and his heart softened strangely. Involuntarily, he seized one of the nearest flowers. It was a little, simple daisy. All that botanists can say in many lectures was explained in a moment by this little flower. It spoke of the glory of its birth. It told of the strength of the sunlight, which had caused its delicate leaves to expand and given to it such sweet perfume. The struggles of life, which arouse sensations in the bosom, have their type in the tiny flowers. Air and light are the lovers of the flowers, but light is the favored one. Towards light it turns, and only when light vanishes does it fold its leaves together and sleep in the embraces of the air. It is light that adorns me, said the flower. Ah, but the air gives you the breath of life, whispered the poet. Just by him stood a boy, splashing with his stick in a marshy ditch. The water drops spurted up among the green twigs, and the clerk thought of the millions of animalculae which were thrown into the air with every drop of water, at a height which must be the same to them as it would be to us if we were hurled beyond the clouds. As the clerk thought of all these things and became conscious of the great change in his own feelings, he smiled and said to himself, I must be asleep and dreaming. And yet, if so, how wonderful for a dream to be so natural and real, and to know at the same time, too, that it is but a dream. I hope I shall be able to remember it all when I wake tomorrow. My sensations seem most unaccountable. I have a clear perception of everything as if I were wide awake. I am quite sure if I recollect all this tomorrow, it will appear utterly ridiculous and absurd. I have had this happen to me before. It is with the clever or wonderful things we say or hear in dreams. As with the gold which comes from under the earth, it is rich and beautiful when we possess it. But when seen in a true light, it is but as stones and withered leaves. Ah! He sighed mournfully as he gazed at the birds singing merrily or hopping from branch to branch. They are much better off than I. Flying is a glorious power. Happy is he who is born with wings. Yes, if I could change myself into anything, I would be a little lark. At the same moment, his coat-tails and sleeves grew together and formed wings. His clothes changed to feathers, and his goloshes to claws. He felt what was taking place, and laughed to himself. Well, now it is evident I must be dreaming, but I never had such a wild dream as this. And then he flew up into the green boughs and sang, but there was no poetry in the song, for his poetic nature had left him. The goloshes, like all persons who wish to do a thing thoroughly, could only attend to one thing at a time. He wished to be a poet, and he became one. Then he wanted to be a little bird, and in this change he lost the characteristics of the former one. Well, thought he, this is charming. By day I sit in a police office amongst the driest law papers, and at night I can dream that I am a lark, flying about in the gardens of Fredericksburg. Really, a complete comedy could be written about it. Then he flew down into the grass, turned his head about in every direction, and tapped his beak on the bending blades of grass, which, in proportion to his size, seemed to him as long as the palm leaves in northern Africa. In another moment, all was darkness around him. It seemed as if something immense had been thrown over him. A sailor boy had flung his large cap over the bird, and a hand came underneath and caught the clerk by the back and wings so roughly that he squeaked and then cried out in his alarm, "You impudent rascal, I am a clerk in the police office." But it only sounded to the boy like, "Tweet, tweet." So he tapped the bird on the beak and walked away with him. In the avenue he met two schoolboys who appeared to belong to a better class of society, but whose inferior abilities kept them in the lowest class at school. These boys bought the bird for 8 pence, and so the clerk returned to Copenhagen. "It is well for me that I am dreaming," he thought. "Otherwise, I should become really angry. First I was a poet, and now I am a lark. It must have been the poetic nature that changed me into this little creature. It is a miserable story indeed, especially now I have fallen into the hands of boys. I wonder what will be the end of it." The boys carried him into a very elegant room, where a stout, pleasant-looking lady received them, but she was not at all gratified to find that they had brought a lark, a common field bird, as she called it. However, she allowed them for one day to place the bird in an empty cage that hung near the window. "It will please Polly, perhaps," she said, laughing at a large gray parrot who was swinging himself proudly on a ring in a handsome brass cage. "It is Polly's birthday," she added in a simpering tone, "and the little field bird has come to offer his congratulations." Polly did not answer a single word. He continued to swing proudly to and fro, but a beautiful canary, who had been brought from his own warm, fragrant fatherland the summer previous, began to sing as loud as he could. "You screamer," said the lady, throwing a white handkerchief over the cage. "Tweet, tweet," sighed he. "What a dreadful snowstorm." And then he became silent. The clerk, or as the lady called him, the field bird, was placed in a little cage close to the canary and not far from the parrot. The only human speech which Polly could utter, and which she sometimes chattered forth most comically, was, "Now let us be men." All besides was a scream, quite as unintelligible as the warbling of the canary bird, excepting to the clerk, who being now a bird, could understand his comrades very well. "I flew beneath green palm trees and amidst the blooming almond trees," sang the canary. "I flew with my brothers and sisters over beautiful flowers and across the clear, bright sea, which reflected the waving foliage in its glittering depths. And I have seen many gay parrots who could relate long and delightful stories." "They were wild birds," answered the parrot, "and totally uneducated. Now let us be men. Why do you not laugh? If the lady and her visitors can laugh at this, surely you can. It is a great failing not to be able to appreciate what is amusing. Now let us be men." "Do you remember," said the canary, "the pretty maidens who used to dance in the tents that were spread out beneath the sweet blossoms? Do you remember the delicious fruit and the cooling juice from the wild herbs?" "Oh yes," said the parrot, "but here I am much better off. I am well fed and treated politely. I know that I have a clever head, and what more do I want? Let us be men now. You have a soul for poetry. I have deep knowledge and wit. You have genius, but no discretion. You raise your naturally high notes so much that you get covered over. They never serve me so. Oh no, I cost them something more than you. I keep them in order with my beak and fling my wit about me. Now let us be men. Tu, O my warm, blooming fatherland, sang the canary bird. I will sing of thy dark green trees and thy quiet streams, where the bending branches kiss the clear, smooth water. I will sing of the joy of my brothers and sisters, as their shining plumage flits among the dark leaves of the plants which grow wild by the springs. Do leave off those dismal strains, said the parrot. Sing something to make us laugh. Laughter is the sign of the highest order of intellect. Can a dog or a horse laugh? No, they can cry. But to man alone is the power of laughter given. Ha, 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 laughed Polly, and repeated his witty saying. Now let us be men. You little gray Danish bird, said the canary, you also have become a prisoner. It is certainly cold in your forests, but still there is liberty there. Fly out. They have forgotten to close the cage, and the window is open at the top. Fly, fly. Lang instinctively, the clerk obeyed and left the cage. At the same moment, the half-opened door leading into the next room creaked on its hinges, and stealthily, with green, fiery eyes, the cat crept in and chased the lark round the room. The canary bird fluttered in his cage, and the parrot flapped his wings and cried, "Let us be men." The poor clerk, in the most deadly terror, flew through the window, over the houses, and through the streets, till at length he was obliged to seek a resting place. A house opposite to him had a look of home. A window stood open. He flew in and perched upon the table. It was his own room. "Let us be men now," said he, involuntarily imitating the parrot, and at the same moment he became a clerk again, only that he was sitting on the table. "Heaven preserve us," said he. "How did I get up here and fall asleep in this way? It was an uneasy dream, too, that I had. The whole affair appears most absurd. The best thing—" The goloshes did. Early on the following morning, while the clerk was still in bed, his neighbor, a young divinity student, who lodged on the same story, knocked at his door, and then walked in. "Lend me your goloshes," said he. "It is so wet in the garden, but the sun is shining brightly. I should like to go out there and smoke my pipe." He put on the goloshes, and was soon in the garden, which contained only one plum tree and one apple tree. Yet in a town, even a small garden like this is a great advantage. The student wandered up and down the path. It was just 6 o'clock, and he could hear the sound of the post horn in the street. "Oh, to travel, cried he. "There is no greater happiness in the world. It is the height of my ambition. This restless feeling would be stilled if I could take a journey far away from this country. I should like to see beautiful Switzerland, to travel through Italy, and—" It was well for him that the goloshes acted immediately. Otherwise, he might have been carried too far for himself as well as for us. In a moment, he found himself in Switzerland, closely packed with 8 others in the diligence. His head ached, his back was stiff, and the blood had ceased to circulate, so that his feet were swelled and pinched by his boots. He wavered in a condition between sleeping and waking. In his right-hand pocket he had a letter of credit. In his left-hand pocket was his passport, and a few louis d'ors were sewn into a little leather bag, which he carried in his breast pocket. Whenever he dozed, he dreamed that he had lost one or another of these possessions. Then he would awake with a start, and the first movements of his hand formed a triangle from his right-hand pocket to his breast, and from his breast to his left-hand pocket, to feel whether they were all safe. Umbrellas, sticks, and hats swung in the net before him and almost obstructed the prospect, which was really very imposing. And as he glanced at it, his memory recalled the words of one poet at least who has sung of Switzerland, and whose poems have not yet been printed. How lovely to my wondering eyes Mont Blanc's fair summits gently rise. 'Tis sweet to breathe the mountain air, if you have gold enough to spare. Grand, dark, and gloomy appeared the landscape around him. The pine forests looked like little groups of moss on high rocks, whose summits were lost in clouds of mist. Presently it began to snow, and the wind blew keen and cold. Ah, he sighed, if I were only on the other side of the Alps now, it would be summer, and I should be able to get money on my letter of credit. The anxiety I feel on this matter prevents me from enjoying myself in Switzerland. Oh, I wish I was on the other side of the Alps. Buggy, and there, in a moment, he found himself far away in the midst of Italy, between Florence and Rome, where the lake Trasimene glittered in the evening sunlight like a sheet of molten gold between the dark blue mountains. There, where Hannibal defeated Flaminius, the grapevines clung to each other with the friendly grasp of their green tendril fingers, while, by the wayside, lovely half-naked children were watching a herd of coal-black swine under the blossoms of fragrant laurel. Could we rightly describe this picturesque scene, our readers would exclaim, "Delightful Italy!" But neither the student nor either of his traveling companions felt the least inclination to think of it in this way. Poisonous flies and gnats flew into the coach by thousands. In vain they drove them away with a myrtle branch. The flies stung them notwithstanding. There was not a man in the coach whose face was not swollen and disfigured with the stings. The poor horses looked wretched. The flies settled on their backs in swarms, and they were only relieved when the coachman got down and drove the creatures off. As the sun set, an icy coldness filled all nature, not, however, of long duration. It produced the feeling which we experience when we enter a vault at a funeral on a summer's day, while the hills and the clouds put on that singular green hue which we often notice in old paintings and look upon as unnatural until we have ourselves seen nature's coloring in the south. It was a glorious spectacle, but the stomachs of the travelers were empty, their bodies exhausted with fatigue, and all the longings of their heart turned towards a resting place for the night. But where to find one they knew not. All the eyes were too eagerly seeking for this resting place to notice the beauties of nature. The road passed through a grove of olive trees. It reminded the student of the willow trees at home. Here stood a lonely inn, and close by it a number of crippled beggars had placed themselves. The brightest among them looked, to quote the words of Marryat, like the eldest son of famine who had just come of age. The others were either blind or had withered legs, which obliged them to creep about on their hands and knees, or they had shriveled arms and hands without fingers. It was indeed poverty arrayed in rags. "Excellenza miserabili," they exclaimed, stretching forth their diseased limbs. The hostess received the travelers with bare feet, untidy hair, and a dirty blouse. The doors were fastened together with string. The floors of the rooms were of brick, broken in many places. Bats flew about under the roof, and as to the odor within, "Let us have supper laid in the stable," said one of the travelers. "Then we shall know what we are breathing." The windows were opened to let in a little fresh air, but quicker than air came in the withered arms and the continual whining sounds. Miserabili, excellenza. On the walls were inscriptions, half of them against La Bella Italia. The supper made its appearance at last. It consisted of watery soup seasoned with pepper and rancid oil. This last delicacy played a principal part in the salad. Musty eggs and roasted cockscombs were the best dishes on the table. Even the wine had a strange taste. It was certainly a mixture. At night, all the boxes were placed against the doors, and one of the travelers watched while the others slept. The student's turn came to watch. How close the air felt in that room. The heat overpowered him. The gnats were buzzing about and stinging, while the miserabili outside moaned in their dreams. Traveling would be all very well, said the student of divinity to himself, if we had no bodies, or if the body could rest while the soul, if flying. Wherever I go, I feel a want which oppresses my heart, for something better presents itself at the moment. Yes, something better, which shall be the best of all. But where is that to be found? In fact, I know in my heart very well what I want. I wish to attain the greatest of all happiness. No sooner were the words spoken than he was at home. Long white curtains shaded the windows of his room, and in the middle of the floor stood a black coffin, in which he now lay in the still sleep of death. His wish was fulfilled, his body was at rest, and his spirit traveling. Esteem no man happy until he is in his grave, were the words of Solon. Here was a strong, fresh proof of their truth. Every corpse is a sphinx of immortality. The sphinx, in this sarcophagus, might unveil its own mystery, in the words which the living had himself written 2 days before. Stern death, thy chilling silence waketh dread, yet in thy darkest hour there may be light. Earth's garden reaper. From the grave's cold bed, the soul on Jacob's ladder takes her flight. Man's greatest sorrows often are a part of hidden griefs, concealed from human eyes, which press far heavier on the lonely heart than now the earth that on his coffin lies. 2 figures were moving about the room. We know them both. One was the fairy named Care, the other the messenger of Fortune. They bent over the dead. "Look," said Care, "what happiness have your goloshes brought to mankind?" "They have at least brought lasting happiness to him who slumbers here," she said. "Not so," said Care. "He went away of himself. He was not summoned. His mental powers were not strong enough to discern the treasures which he had been destined to discover. I will do him a favor now." And she drew the goloshes from his feet. The sleep of death was ended, and the recovered man raised himself. Care vanished, and with her the goloshes. Doubtless she looked upon them as her own property. The Swineherd. There was once a poor prince who had a kingdom. His kingdom was very small, but still quite large enough to marry upon. And he wished to marry. It was certainly rather cool of him to say to the emperor's daughter, "Will you have me?" But so he did, for his name was renowned far and wide, and there were 100 princesses who would have answered, "Yes," and "Thank you kindly." We shall see what this princess said. Listen. It happened that where the prince's father lay buried, there grew a rose tree, a most beautiful rose tree, which blossomed only once in every 5 years, and even then bore only 1 flower. But that was a rose. It smelt so sweet that all cares and sorrows were forgotten by him who inhaled its fragrance. And furthermore, the prince had a nightingale, who could sing in such a manner that it seemed as though all sweet melodies dwelt in her little throat. So the princess was to have the rose and the nightingale, and they were accordingly put into large silver caskets and sent to her. The emperor had them brought into a large hall where the princess was playing at visiting with the ladies of the court, and when she saw the caskets with the presents, she clapped her hands for joy. "Ah, if it were but a little pussy cat," said she, but the rose tree with its beautiful rose came to view. "Oh, how prettily it is made," said all the court ladies. "It is more than pretty," said the emperor. "It is charming." But the princess touched it and was almost ready to cry. "Fie, papa," said she. "It is not made at all. It is natural. Let us see what is in the other casket before we get into a bad humor," said the emperor. So the nightingale came forth and sang so delightfully that at first no one could say anything ill-humored of her. "Superbe, charmante," exclaimed the ladies, for they all used to chatter French, each one worse than her neighbor. "How much the bird reminds me of the musical box that belonged to our blessed empress," said an old knight. "Oh yes, these are the same tones, the same execution." "Yes, yes," said the emperor, and he wept like a child at the remembrance. "I will still hope that it is not a real bird," said the princess. "Yes, it is a real bird," said those who had brought it. "Well then, let the bird fly," said the princess, and she positively refused to see the prince. However, he was not to be discouraged. He daubed his face over brown and black, pulled his cap over his ears, and knocked at the door. "Good day to my lord the emperor," said he. "Can I have employment at the palace?" "Why, yes," said the emperor. "I want someone to take care of the pigs, for we have a great many of them." So the prince was appointed imperial swineherd. He had a dirty little room close by the pigsty, and there he sat the whole day and worked. By the evening he had made a pretty little kitchen pot. Little bells were hung all round it, and when the pot was boiling, these bells tinkled in the most charming manner and played the old melody. "Ach, du lieber Augustin, alles ist weg, weg, weg." "Ah, dear Augustine, all is gone, gone, gone." Shh! But what was still more curious, whoever held his finger in the smoke of the kitchen pot immediately smelt all the dishes that were cooking on every hearth in the city. This, you see, was something quite different from the rose. Now the princess happened to walk that way, and when she heard the tune, she stood quite still and seemed pleased, for she could play Lieber Augustine. It was the only piece she knew, and she played it with one finger. "Why, there is my piece," said the princess. "That swineherd must certainly have been well educated. Go in and ask him the price of the instrument." So one of the court ladies must run in. However, she drew on wooden slippers first. "What will you take for the kitchen pot?" said the lady. "I will have 10 kisses from the princess," said the swineherd. "Yes, indeed," said the lady. "I cannot sell it for less," rejoined the swineherd. "He is an impudent fellow," said the princess, and she walked on. But when she had gone a little way, the bells tinkled so prettily. "Ach, du lieber Augustine, alles ist weg, weg, weg." "Stay," said the princess. "Ask him if he will have 10 kisses from the ladies of my court." "No, thank you," said the swineherd. 10 kisses from the princess, or I keep the kitchen pot myself." "That must not be either," said the princess. "But do you all stand before me that no one may see us. and the court ladies placed themselves in front of her and spread out their dresses. The swineherd got 10 kisses, and the princess the kitchen pot. That was delightful. The pot was boiling the whole evening and the whole of the following day. They knew perfectly well what was cooking at every fire throughout the city, from the chamberlains to the cobblers. The court ladies danced and clapped their hands. We know who has soup and who has pancakes for dinner today, who has cutlets and who has eggs. How interesting. Yes, but keep my secret, for I am an emperor's daughter. The swineherd, that is to say. The prince, for no one knew that he was other than an ill-favored swineherd, let not a day pass without working at something. He at last constructed a rattle, which, when it was swung round, played all the waltzes and jig tunes which have ever been heard since the creation of the world. "Ah, that is superbe," said the princess when she passed by. "I have never heard prettier compositions. Go in and ask him the price of the instrument. But mind, he shall have no more kisses." "He will have 100 kisses from the princess," said the lady who had been to ask. "I think he is not in his right senses," said the princess, and walked on. But when she had gone a little way, she stopped again. "One must encourage art," said she. "I am the emperor's daughter. Tell him he shall, as on yesterday, have 10 kisses from me, and may take the rest from the ladies of the court." "Oh, but we should not like that at all," said they. "What are you muttering?" asked the princess. "If I can kiss him, surely you can. Remember that you owe everything to me." So the ladies were obliged to go to him again. "100 kisses from the princess," said he, "or else let everyone keep his own." "Stand round," said she, and all the ladies stood round her whilst the kissing was going on. "What can be the reason for such a crowd close by the pigsty?" said the emperor, who happened just then to step out on the balcony. He rubbed his eyes and put on his spectacles. "They are the ladies of the court. I must go down and see what they are about." So he pulled up his slippers at the heel, for he had trodden them down. As soon as he had got into the courtyard, he moved very softly, and the ladies were so much engrossed with counting the kisses that all might go on fairly, that they did not perceive the emperor. He rose on his tiptoes. "What is all this?" said he, when he saw what was going on, and he boxed the princess's ears with his slipper, just as the swineherd was taking the 86th kiss. "March out," said the emperor, for he was very angry. And both princess and swineherd were thrust out of the city. The princess now stood and wept, the swineherd scolded, and the rain poured down. "Alas, unhappy creature that I am," said the princess, "if I had but married the handsome young prince. Ah, how unfortunate I am." And the swineherd went behind a tree, washed the black and brown color from his face, threw off his dirty clothes, and stepped forth in his princely robes. He looked so noble that the princess could not help bowing before him. "I am come to despise thee," said he. "Thou wouldst not have an honorable prince. Thou couldst not prize the rose and the nightingale, but thou wast ready to kiss the swineherd for the sake of a trumpery plaything. Thou art rightly served." He then went back to his own little kingdom and shut the door of his palace in her face. Now she might well sing, "Ach, du lieber Augustin, alles ist weg, weg, weg." Holger Danske. In Denmark there stands an old castle named Kronenberg, close by the Sound of Elsinore, where large ships, both English, Russian, and Prussian, pass by hundreds every day, and they salute the old castle with cannons, boom, boom, which is as if they said, good day. And the cannons of the old castle answer, boom, which means many thanks. In winter, no ships sail by, for the whole sound is covered with ice as far as the Swedish coast, and has quite the appearance of a high road. The Danish and the Swedish flags wave, and Danes and Swedes say, good day, and thank you. To each other, not with cannons, but with a friendly shake of the hand, and they exchange white bread and biscuits with each other, because foreign articles taste the best. But the most beautiful sight of all is the old castle of Kronenberg, where Holger Danske sits in the deep, dark cellar, into which no one goes. He is clad in iron and steel, and rests his head on his strong arm. His long beard hangs down upon the marble table, into which it has become firmly rooted. He sleeps and dreams, but in his dreams he sees everything that happens in Denmark. On each Christmas Eve, an angel comes to him and tells him that all he has dreamed is true, and that he may go to sleep again in peace, as Denmark is not yet in any real danger. But should danger ever come, then Holger Danske will rouse himself, and the table will burst asunder as he draws out his beard. Then he will come forth in his strength, and strike a blow that shall sound in all the countries of the world. An old grandfather sat and told his little grandson all this about Holger Danske, and the boy knew that what his grandfather told him must be true. As the old man related this story, he was carving an image in wood to represent Holger Danske, to be fastened to the prow of a ship. For the old grandfather was a carver in wood, that is, one who carved figures for the heads of ships according to the names given to them. And now he had carved Holger Danske, who stood there erect and proud, with his long beard, holding in one hand his broad battle-axe, while with the other he leaned on the Danish arms. The old grandfather told the little boy a great deal about Danish men and women who had distinguished themselves in olden times, so that he fancied he knew as much even as Holger Danske himself, who, after all, could only dream. And when the little fellow went to bed, he thought so much about it that he actually pressed his chin against the counterpane, and imagined that he had a long beard which had become rooted to it. But the old grandfather remained sitting at his work and carving away at the last part of it, which was the Danish arms. And when he had finished, he looked at the whole figure and thought of all he had heard and read, and what he had that evening related to his little grandson. Then he nodded his head, wiped his spectacles, and put them on, and said, "Ah, yes, Holger Danske will not appear in my lifetime, but the boy who is in bed there may very likely live to see him when the event really comes to pass." And the old grandfather nodded again, and the more he looked at Holger Danske, the more satisfied he felt that he had carved a good image of him. It seemed to glow with the color of life. The armor glittered like iron and steel. The hearts in the Danish arms grew more and more red, while the lions with gold crowns on their heads were leaping up. "That is the most beautiful coat of arms in the world," said the old man. "The lions represent strength, and the hearts, gentleness and love." And as he gazed on the uppermost lion, he thought of King Canute, who chained great England to Denmark's throne, and he looked at the second lion and thought of Waldemar, who untied Denmark and conquered the Vandals. The third lion reminded him of Margaret, who united Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. But when he gazed at the red hearts, their colors glowed more deeply, even as flames, and his memory followed each in turn. The first led him to a dark, narrow prison, in which sat a prisoner, a beautiful woman, daughter of Christian IV, Eleanor Ulfeld. And the flame became a rose on her bosom, and its blossoms were not more pure than the heart of this noblest and best of all Danish women. "Ah, yes, that is indeed a noble heart in the Danish arms," said the grandfather. And his spirit followed the second flame, which carried him out to sea, where cannons roared and the ships lay shrouded in smoke, and the flaming heart attached itself to the breast of Hvitfeldt in the form of the ribbon of an order, as he blew himself and his ship into the air in order to save the fleet. And the third flame led him to Greenland's wretched huts, where the preacher, Hans Egede, ruled with love in every word and action. The flame was as a star on his breast, and added another heart to the Danish arms. And as the old grandfather's spirit followed the next hovering flame, he knew whither it would lead him. In a peasant woman's humble room stood Frederick VI, writing his name with chalk on the beam. The flame trembled on his breast and in his heart, and it was in the peasant's room that his heart became one for the Danish arms. The old grandfather wiped his eyes, for he had known King Frederick, with his silvery locks and his honest blue eyes, and had lived for him, and he folded his hands and remained for some time silent. Then his daughter came to him, and said it was getting late, that he ought to rest for a while, and that the supper was on the table. "What you have been carving is very beautiful, grandfather," said she. "Holger Danske and the old coat of arms. It seems to me as if I have seen the face somewhere." "No, that is impossible," replied the old grandfather. "But I have seen it, and I have tried to carve it in wood, as I have retained it in my memory. It was a long time ago, while the English fleet lay in the roads, on the 2nd of April, when we showed that we were true, ancient Danes. I was on board the Denmark in Stenbill's squadron. I had a man by my side whom even the cannonballs seemed to fear. He sung old songs in a merry voice, and fired and fought as if he were something more than a man. I still remember his face, but from whence he came, or whither he went, I know not. No one knows. I have often thought it might have been Holger Danske himself, who had swam down to us from Kronenberg to help us in the hour of danger. That was my idea, and there stands his likeness. The wooden figure threw a gigantic shadow on the wall, and even on part of the ceiling. It seemed as if the real Holger Danske stood behind it, for the shadow moved. But this was no doubt caused by the flame of the lamp not burning steadily. Then the daughter-in-law kissed the old grandfather and led him to a large armchair by the table. And she and her husband, who was the son of the old man and the father of the little boy who lay in bed, sat down to supper with him. And the old grandfather talked of the Danish lions and the Danish hearts, emblems of strength and gentleness, and explained quite clearly that there is another strength than that which lies in a sword. And he pointed to a shelf where lay a number of old books, and amongst them a collection of Holberg's plays, which are much read and are so clever and amusing that it is easy to fancy we have known the people of those days who are described in them. He knew how to fight also, said the old man, for he lashed the follies and prejudices of people during his whole life. Then the grandfather nodded to a place above the looking-glass, where hung an almanac with a representation of the round tower upon it, and said, Tycho Brahe was another of those who used a sword, but not one to cut into the flesh and bone, but to make the way of the stars of heaven clear and plain to be understood. And then he whose father belonged to my calling, yes, he, the son of the old image carver, he whom we ourselves have seen, with his silvery locks and his broad shoulders, whose name is known in all lands. Yes, he was a sculptor, while I am only a carver. Holger Danske can appear in marble, so that people in all countries of the world may hear of the strength of Denmark. Now let us drink the health of Beetle. But the little boy in bed saw plainly the old castle of Kronenberg, and the sound of Elsinore, and Holger Danske far down in the cellar, with his beard rooted to the table, and dreaming of everything that was passing above him. And Holger Danske did dream of the little humble room in which the image carver sat. He heard all that had been said, and he nodded in his dream, saying, "Ah, yes, remember me, you Danish people. Keep me in your memory. I will come to you in the hour of need." The bright morning light shone over Kronenberg, and the wind brought the sound of the hunting horn across from the neighboring shores. The ships sailed by and saluted the castle with the boom of the cannon, and Kronenberg returned the salute, boom, boom. But the roaring cannons did not awake Holger Danske, for they meant only good morning and thank you. They must fire in another fashion before he awakes, but wake he will, for there is energy yet in Holger Danske. The child in the grave. It was a day clothed in sorrow, a day when every room in the house seemed dimmed, though the sun still shone beyond the windows. Silence lay heavy over the hearth. Even the ticking of the clock sounded like the echo of grief. For death had entered that home and taken away the youngest child, a boy of 4, fair and gentle, the light and laughter of the family, the promise of all their joy to come. He had been the father's pride, the mother's soul, the very pulse of their happiness. Now the cradle was empty, and his small voice, once ringing with laughter, was still. 2 daughters remained, both good and tender-hearted, the elder soon to be confirmed, the younger still full of childhood's innocence. Yet to human hearts, the one who has been taken is always the dearest. And when that child is the youngest, when it is a son, his absence feels like a wound that never closes. The sisters wept as children weep, suddenly, deeply, then silently. Yet their sorrow was doubled when they saw the desolation in their parents' eyes. The father bore his grief with bowed head and trembling lips. He struggled to stand upright beneath the invisible weight that pressed upon him. But the mother, the mother was crushed beneath it. She had watched over her little one day and night, holding him close to her breast, as if her own heartbeat could sustain his failing life. Even when his breath grew faint, she had whispered prayers that trembled with faith. God will not take him. God knows I cannot live without him. When at last death came, when no prayer could recall the spirit that had flown, her heart broke under the certainty. It is not God who has done this, she cried in her fevered despair. It is cruel spirits upon the earth who act in his name, but know not mercy. And so her faith, once bright as a candle, flickered and went out. Her mind wandered into dark places where doubt whispered that man is but dust, that when life ceases, all ends. Yet those thoughts gave her no rest. They were hollow as tombs, offering no ground to stand upon. She sank instead into the blackness of despair, a sorrow too deep for tears. Days passed. She moved through the house like one who walked in a dream. Her daughters spoke softly, hoping to reach her. Her husband laid his trembling hand upon her brow, but she neither heard nor felt. All her being lived in the memory of the little one, his voice, his steps, the soft weight of him asleep against her shoulder. She had no eyes for the living. Her soul followed the dead. At last, the day of the funeral arrived. For many nights she had not slept, her body trembling under the burden of grief. But when morning came, a pale morning veiled in mist, she fell into a heavy slumber. While she slept, they brought the small coffin into another room and nailed down the lid, so that she might not hear the cruel blows of the hammer. When she awoke and asked for her child, the father's voice broke as he said, "The coffin is closed, my dear. It had to be done." She looked at him with eyes that held no tears left to shed. "If heaven is so hard," she whispered, "how can I look for kindness among men?" That evening the coffin was borne away to the churchyard, and the mother sat by the hearth with her daughters beside her. Their hands rested in hers, but she did not feel their touch. Her gaze was distant, fixed beyond the walls, beyond the world. Grief tossed her like a ship without sail or compass upon a stormy sea. So, the day ended, and other days followed, gray, heavy, and alike. The husband prayed, the daughters wept, but no word of comfort found its way to her heart. Sleep, which would have been a balm, fled from her eyes. When at last she lay down, she lay as one lifeless, her face as still as marble. Then one night, as her husband watched beside her, he thought he heard the deep, even breathing of rest. Believing she had at last found sleep, he folded his hands in prayer and himself drifted into slumber. But she, poor soul, rose softly, put on her cloak, and glided from the house. Her feet carried her where her heart had long been waiting, to the grave of her child. It was a still September night. Stars trembled like tears in the sky, and the air was cool and sweet. The churchyard lay silvered in moonlight, the graves like islands of shadow amid the grass. She passed unseen through the gate and came to the small mound where flowers still bloomed fresh and fragrant. She sank beside it, laying her cheek against the earth as though she could feel his warmth beneath. His smile seemed to glimmer before her. His eyes, so gentle even in suffering, shone in her memory. How clearly she saw the moment when his small hand had grown too weak to lift, when she had pressed it against her heart and whispered, "Stay with me." Now she sat as she once had by his bedside, but the cold earth divided them. Then a voice spoke beside her, deep, clear, and solemn, a voice that seemed to echo both from within and from the heavens. "Thou wouldst go down to thy child," it said. She lifted her head in terror. A tall figure stood near, wrapped in a black cloak, the hood drawn low. Yet beneath its shadow she saw a face, stern, yet luminous, youthful, and full of an unearthly calm. "Down to my child," she murmured. "Oh, if I might go." "Darest thou follow me?" said the figure. "I am death." She bowed her head in silence. The stars grew brighter, their light spilling over the grave like liquid silver. The earth seemed to part and open beneath her as the cloak of the stranger enveloped her. Darkness fell, not the darkness of night, but the stillness of death itself. Down, down she sank, deeper than any spade could reach, until the churchyard above her was only a shadowed roof. When at last the cloak was lifted, she stood within a vast hall filled with soft twilight. A tremor of awe passed through her. Then she saw him, her child, smiling, radiant, more beautiful than ever. With a cry, she gathered him to her heart. Music floated around them, a sound so pure and heavenly that her spirit quivered with wonder. From beyond a dark curtain came the harmonies of eternity, swelling and subsiding like a living breath. "My sweet mother," said the child's voice, gentle as before. "Mother, it is beautiful here. Look, do you not see?" He pointed toward the curtain, but her mortal eyes beheld only shadow. She could hear the music, but not the word within the song, the divine meaning her heart had lost. She pressed him close and wept. "I can fly now, mother," he whispered. "I fly with other happy children before the throne of God. But if you grieve for me as you do now, you will never see me again. May I go, mother? You will come soon. Will you not? Stay yet a little while," she pleaded. "Let me look upon you once more. Let me hold you again, my darling." She covered him with kisses, trembling between joy and agony. Then, far above, she heard her own name called, a plaintive human cry. "Do you hear?" said the child. "It is my father calling, and those sobs, do you not know them? They are my sisters. Mother, have you forgotten them?" Her heart shuddered. She looked around. Dim forms drifted past, moving toward the dark curtain, vanishing beyond. Would her husband, her daughters pass that way too? Their voices still rose from the world above. In her longing for the dead, she had nearly forsaken the living. "Mother," said the child softly, "the bells of heaven are ringing. The sun is rising." A flood of light broke through the darkness. The child faded from her arms, and she felt herself borne upward. Cold air brushed her face. She opened her eyes and saw the gray dawn. She was lying upon the grave of her child, the dew like tears upon her hands. Then she knew the Lord had visited her in a dream, to lead her heart back from the shadow of death to the light of the living. She knelt and prayed, her tears, this time not of despair, but repentance. "Forgive me, O God," she whispered. "I would have kept a soul from its flight to thee. I forgot those still in my care." When she rose, her heart was lighter. The first rays of the sun broke through the clouds. A little bird sang from the church spire. The bells began to ring for morning prayer. All seemed holy around her, and her soul was calm. She felt again that faith which sorrow had stolen from her. When she returned home, she bent over her husband, who still slept. Her kiss woke him, and he saw peace upon her face. "Whence comes this strength?" he asked. "What has renewed your heart so suddenly?" She smiled through her tears, gathering her daughters to her arms. "It came from God," she said softly, "through our child in the grave." And from that day forth, her faith was steadfast. Whatever sorrow the Lord might send, she bore it with the words always upon her lips. "Whatever he doeth is right and best." The Beetle. The emperor's horse was shod with gold, a golden shoe on each of its feet. And why was he getting golden shoes? He was a magnificent-looking animal, with slender legs, intelligent eyes, and a mane that hung down his neck like a soft veil of silk. He had carried his master through the smoke and flame of battle, and heard the bullets sing and whistle around him. He had kicked and bitten those about him, and done his share of the fighting whenever the enemy advanced. He had leaped, carrying his master on his back over the enemy's fallen horse, and had saved the emperor's red gold crown, saved the life of the emperor, which was much more valuable than the red gold. And that's why the emperor's horse had golden shoes. a golden shoe on each of his feet, and the beetle came creeping out. "First the big ones," he said, "and then the little ones, but size isn't the only thing that does it." Then he stretched out his thin legs. "And what do you want?" demanded the blacksmith. "Golden shoes," replied the beetle. "Why, you must be crazy," said the blacksmith. "Do you want golden shoes, too?" "Golden shoes," said the beetle. "I'm just as good as that great creature that is waited on, curry-combed and brushed, and served with food and drink. Don't I belong to the imperial stable, too?" But why does the horse have golden shoes?" asked the blacksmith. "Don't you understand that?" "Understand? I understand that it is a personal insult to me," said the beetle. "It's just done to annoy me, so I'm going out into the world." "Get out of here," said the blacksmith. "What a rude person," said the beetle as he left the stable. He flew a little way and presently found himself in a beautiful flower garden, all fragrant with roses and lavender. "Isn't it lovely here?" asked one of the little ladybirds that were flying about, with black spots on their red shield-like wings. "How sweet it smells here, and how beautiful it is." "I'm used to much better things," said the beetle. "Do you call this beautiful? Why, there isn't so much as a manure pile here." Then he went on and got into the shadow of a large gillyflower. A caterpillar was crawling along on it. "How beautiful the world is," said the caterpillar. "The sun is so warm, and everything is so pleasant. And when my time comes, and I must die, as people call it, I'll wake up again, and I'll be a butterfly." "What conceit," said the beetle. "You fly about like a butterfly, indeed. I'm from the stable of the emperor, and no one there, not even the emperor's favorite horse, who wears my cast-off golden shoes, has any idea like that. Get wings, fly. Why, I can fly already." And then the beetle flew away. I don't really want to be annoyed, and yet I am annoyed. Soon afterward, he settled on a large lawn. Here he lay quietly for a while, and then he fell asleep. My goodness! The rain came down in buckets. The noise woke up the beetle, and he wanted to get down into the earth at once, but he couldn't. He tumbled over. Sometimes he was swimming on his stomach, sometimes on his back, and it was out of the question to try to fly. Would he ever escape from there with his life? So he just lay where he was and remained, lying there. When the rain had let up a little and the beetle had blinked the water from his eyes, he saw something gleaming white. It was linen that had been put out there to bleach. He managed to make his way to it and creep into a fold of the damp cloth. Certainly this place wasn't as comfortable as the warm stable, but there was nothing better. And so he stayed there for a whole day and a whole night, while the rain stayed too. The next morning he crept out, very much annoyed with the weather. 2 frogs were sitting on the linen, their bright eyes shining with pleasure. "What wonderful weather this is," one of them said. "How refreshing! And this linen holds the water together so perfectly. My hind legs are tickling as if I were going to swim." "I'd like to know," said the other frog, "whether the swallow, who flies so far in her many trips to foreign countries, ever finds a better climate than ours. Such a storm and such a downpour. You really might think you were lying in a wet ditch. Anybody that doesn't enjoy this weather certainly doesn't love his native country." "Have you ever been in the emperor's stable?" asked the beetle. "The dampness there is both warm and refreshing. That's what I am used to. That's the climate for me. But one can't take it along on a journey." "Isn't there a nice hotbed here in the garden where persons of rank like me can find a place to live and make himself at home? But the frogs either didn't or wouldn't understand him. "I never ask a question twice," said the beetle, after he had already asked 3 times without getting any answer. He went on a little farther and bumped against a piece of broken pottery. It certainly shouldn't have been lying there, but since it was, it gave good shelter. Several families of earwigs lived here, and they didn't need very much room. But they liked company. The females were full of the most devoted mother love, and so each one considered her own child the most beautiful and clever of all. "Our son has become engaged," said one mother. "The sweet, innocent baby. His greatest ambition is to creep someday into a clergyman's ear. He's such a lovely boy, and being engaged will keep him out of mischief. What joy for a mother." "Our son," said another mother, "had hardly crept from the egg before he got into mischief. He's so full of life and spirits he'll run his horns off. What joy that is for a mother. Isn't that true, Mr. Beetle?" For she had recognized the stranger by his shape. "You're both quite right," said the beetle, so they invited him to walk in, that is, to come as far as he could under the broken flower pot. "Now you ought to see my little earwig," observed a third mother and a fourth. "They're such lovely children, and so amusing. They never behave badly, except when they have a stomach ache, but that happens pretty often at their age." Then each mother spoke of her own youngster, and the youngsters joined in the conversation and used the little forks in their tails to pull the beetle's mustache. "The little scamps, they're always up to something," said the mothers, beaming with maternal love. But the beetle was bored by all this, and so he asked how far it was to the nearest hotbed. "Oh, that's way out in the world, on the other side of the ditch," said an earwig. "I hope none of my children ever goes that far. It would be the death of me." "Just the same, I'll try to go that far," said the beetle. And then he went off without taking any formal leave, for that's considered the politest thing to do. And by the ditch he met several of his kind, all beetles. "We live here," they said, "and we're very cozy here too. May we invite you to step down into this rich soil? The journey must have tired you out." "Indeed it has," said the beetle. "I've been lying on linen out in the rain, and cleanliness tires me very much. I also have rheumatism in my wing joints, from standing in a draft under a broken flower pot. It's really very relaxing to be among one's own kind again." "Perhaps you come from the hotbed?" asked the oldest of them. "Oh, I come from a much higher place," said the beetle. "I come from the emperor's stable, where I was born with golden shoes on. I'm traveling on a secret mission. You mustn't ask me any questions, for I won't tell you anything." And so the beetle stepped down into the rich soil. There sat 3 young lady beetles, and they tittered because they didn't know what to say. "They are not engaged yet," said their mother. And then the young lady beetles tittered again, this time from embarrassment. "I have never seen greater beauties even in the emperor's stables," said the traveling beetle. "Now don't you spoil my daughters," said the mother. "And please don't speak to them unless you have serious intentions. But of course, your intentions are honorable, and so I give you my blessing." "Hurrah!" cried all the other beetles at once, and so the beetle was engaged. First the engagement, then the wedding. There was nothing to wait for. The following day passed pleasantly, and the next was fair enough, but by the 3rd day it was time to think of food for the wife and perhaps for children. "I've let them put something over on me," he said, "and now the only thing to do is put something over on them in return." And that he did. Away he went, away all day, and away all night, while his wife was left a widow. The other beetles said that they had taken nothing more than a complete tramp into the family, and now his wife was left a burden on their hands. "Well then, she shall be unmarried again," said her mother, "and sit here among my unmarried daughters. Shame on that disgusting rascal who deserted her." Meanwhile, the beetle had been traveling on and had sailed across the ditch on a cabbage leaf. That morning, 2 persons came by, and when they saw the beetle, they picked him up, turned him over and over, and both looked very learned, especially one of them, a boy. "Allah sees the black beetle in the black stone and in the black mountain," he said. "Isn't that in the Koran?" Then he translated the beetle's name into Latin and discoursed upon its nature and family history. The older scholar was opposed to carrying him home, saying they had just as good a specimen there. This, the beetle thought, was a very rude thing to say. Consequently, he suddenly flew out of the speaker's hand. As his wings were dry now, he flew a considerable distance and reached a greenhouse, where he found a sash of the glass roof partly open. So, with the greatest of ease, he slipped in and buried himself in the manure. "It's very comfortable here," he remarked. Soon he fell asleep and dreamed that the emperor's horse had fallen down and that Mr. Beetle had been given its golden shoes, with the promise that he should have 2 more. It was all very charming, and when the beetle woke up, he crept out and looked around him. What splendor there was in the greenhouse! Great palm trees were growing high, and the sun made them look transparent, and beneath them what a riot of green and blooming flowers, red as fire, yellow as amber, or white as freshly fallen snow. "What magnificent plants! How delicious they'll taste when they're nice and decayed," said the beetle. "This is a splendid larder. I am sure some of my relatives live here. I'll just see if I can find anyone fit to associate with. I'm proud, and I'm proud of being that way." So he thought of the dream he had had about the dying horse and the golden shoes he had won. But suddenly a hand seized the beetle and squeezed him and turned him over and over. The gardener's little son and his playmate had come to the greenhouse and, seeing the beetle, had decided to have some fun with him. First he was wrapped in a vine leaf and then shoved down into a warm trouser's pocket. He squirmed and wriggled, but he got a good squeezing from the boy's hand. The boy went rapidly toward the great lake at the bottom of the garden. Here they put the beetle in an old broken wooden shoe with the top part missing. A little stick was placed upright for a mast, and to this the beetle was bound with a woolen thread. Now he was a skipper and had to sail away. The lake was very large, and to the beetle it seemed a vast ocean. He was so amazed at its size that he fell over on his back and kicked out with all his legs. The wooden shoe sailed away. The current bore it along, but whenever it went too far from shore, one of the boys would roll up his trousers, go in after it, and bring it back. However, just as it sailed merrily out to sea again, the boys were called away, and quite sharply, too, so that they ran away from the lake, leaving the wooden shoe to its fate. It drifted away from the shore, farther and farther out. It was a terrible situation for the beetle. He couldn't fly, for he was bound tightly to the mast. Then a fly paid him a visit. "What beautiful weather we're having," said the fly. "I'll rest here. I can take a sun bath here. You're certainly having a nice time of it." "You don't know what you're talking about," replied the beetle. "Can't you see I'm tied up?" "I'm not a prisoner," said the fly, and promptly flew away. "Well, now I guess I know the world," the Beetle said. "And it's a mean place. I'm the only honest person in it. First, they won't give me my golden shoes. Then I have to lie on wet linen and stand in a draft. And as a climax, they hitch a wife to me. Then, when I made a quick move out into the world and found out how people live and how I ought to live, one of these human puppies comes and ties me up and leaves me to the mercy of the wild ocean, while the emperor's horse prances about proudly in golden shoes. That's what annoys me more than anything else. But you mustn't expect sympathy in this world. My career has been very interesting, but what's the good of that if nobody knows about it? The world doesn't deserve to know about it, for it should have given me golden shoes when the emperor's horse was shod, and I stretched out my feet to be shod too. If they'd given me golden shoes, I'd have been an honor to the stable. Now the stable has lost me, and the world has lost me. It's all over." But it wasn't all over yet. Some young girls came rowing up in a boat. "There's an old wooden shoe sailing along over there," said one of them. "And there's a little animal tied fast in it," said another. Their boat came quite close to the wooden shoe, and they fished him out of the water. One of the girls took out a tiny pair of scissors and cut the woolen thread without hurting the beetle. And when she stepped on shore, she placed him down on the grass. "Crawl, crawl, fly, fly away if you can," she said. "Freedom is a precious thing." And the beetle flew straight through the open window of a large building, and there he sank down, tired and exhausted, in the long, fine, soft mane of the emperor's favorite horse, which was standing in the stable where he and the beetle lived. He clung fast to the mane and sat there a little while until he had collected himself. "Here I am sitting on the emperor's favorite horse. Yes, sitting on him as his rider. But what am I saying? Oh yes, now it's clear to me. Yes, it's a good idea, and quite right. Why did the horse get golden shoes? The blacksmith asked me. Now I know the answer. They were given to the horse on my account. That put the beetle in good spirits again. Traveling broadens the mind, he said. The sun's rays streamed in on him and shone very brightly. On the whole, the world isn't so bad after all, said the beetle. But you must know how to take it. The world was wonderful, because the emperor's favorite horse had golden shoes, and because the beetle was its rider. Now I am going down to the other beetles and tell them about all the pleasures I have enjoyed on my trip abroad. And I am going to say that now I'm going to stay at home until the horse has worn out his golden shoes. The Bird of Folklore. It was wintertime. The earth lay buried beneath a vast white shroud, a mantle of snow smooth as carved marble from some forgotten mountain. The rivers had turned to glass, and every pond gleamed like a mirror cast by the moon. Above stretched a sky of purest crystal, so high and remote that it seemed not made for human eyes. The air was thin and sharp, cutting the breath like a sword forged by unseen elves, and every tree stood motionless, cloaked in frost, its branches shining like white coral, or like the almond trees of early spring caught in eternal bloom. Even silence seemed alive in that air, crisp, clean, almost holy. At night, the heavens opened in shimmering splendor. The northern lights streamed like veils of fire. Stars multiplied beyond number, cold and trembling. The world was frozen, but not dead. It merely waited. Far away, storms were gathering, hidden in the horizon's breast. Dark clouds rose from the edge of the sea, and through their folds drifted flakes of snow as soft as swan feathers. They fluttered down endlessly, filling the hollows, covering the lanes and fields and roofs of sleeping houses. The land disappeared under that gentle flood until the world itself seemed only snow and sky. Yet we were safe indoors, by a hearth whose glow painted the walls in hues of gold and rose. The fire hummed softly, and shadows danced upon the ceiling as though they too wished to tell stories. In that warm circle of light, with the storm whispering outside like a chorus of distant spirits, a voice began to speak. It told an ancient legend, a tale older than the memory of men. "By the open sea," said the voice, "there lay a Viking's grave. At midnight, when the moon was at her highest, the ghost of that buried king rose and sat upon the mound. The golden crown still gleamed upon his brow, though he was pale as moonlight and robed in the rust of iron and steel. His hair fluttered in the cold wind, and his eyes shone with sorrow, deeper than the ocean's heart. He bowed his head and sighed, a sound that was neither of this world nor the next. Then, out of the mists upon the sea, came a ship. Her sails were dim in the moonlight, and her men moved silently as they anchored by the shore. Among them was a skald, a poet of the old northern kind, whose harp hung at his side like a second heart. Seeing the shadow on the mound, he stepped forth and spoke. "Why do you grieve, O king of valor? Why does your spirit wander unblessed beneath the stars?" And the dead man answered, in a voice that seemed the echo of waves upon stone, "Because no song was ever sung of my deeds. They are buried as I am buried. The memory of my battles and my glory has faded like mist. No minstrel bore my name across the lands. No melody carried my spirit into the hearts of men. Therefore, I have no peace. My sword sleeps, but my soul cannot." Then he told the skald of all his victories and all his labors, of kingdoms defended, of enemies overthrown, of treasures won and lost, and of his final fall. The skald listened with reverence, for in that lament he heard the heartbeat of a forgotten age. And when the tale was done, he touched the strings of his harp. The sound rose pure and trembling, like the first song of creation. He sang of the hero's youth, of his courage, his laughter, the storm in his eyes. He sang of his manhood, his strength, his mercy, his love for his people. He sang of the twilight of his days, when all lights fade but honor remains. As the song rose, the ghost's face brightened, as though a veil of darkness were lifted. The sorrow left his eyes, replaced by the glow of peace. His form shimmered like moonlight on the sea. He stood, radiant, then vanished upward in a beam of pale glory, leaving only the green mound of turf and the runeless stone. Yet as the final chord of the harp faded, something wondrous happened. Out of the still air flew a tiny bird, so small and light it might have been born from the very breath of the song. Its feathers gleamed with the colors of dawn. It sang with the voice of the thrush, yet deeper, richer, carrying in it the secret ache of the human heart. It was the bird of folklore, the spirit of song itself, which never dies. It rose into the night and vanished over hill and valley, its melody lingering like the echo of memory. We still hear that song, even now, here in our quiet room, while the snowstorm roams outside. The wind beats against the window panes, but within, the bird sings. It does not sing only of heroes and kings. It sings of love and longing, of faithfulness in the frozen north, of the laughter of children and the tears of widows. It weaves old proverbs into melody, and through it the voices of the past speak again, as though runes were laid upon a dead man's tongue. In that song, we rediscover the homeland of the soul, the land of the Bird of Folklore. In the age of heathen warriors, when the Vikings ruled by sword and sea, its nest lay within the bard's harp. When the world grew older, and the iron fist of knighthood ruled the earth, when might alone was justice, and the peasant was counted no higher than his dog, where then could the bird take shelter? Not in the castles of pride, nor in the markets of greed. But look, above the balcony of some lonely lady, who wrote by candlelight the stories she had heard from her nurse, or within the low, green-turfed cottage where the wandering peddler shared tales beside the hearth. There it perched and sang. So long as there is grass beneath the feet of men, that bird shall never perish, and still it sings for us. Outside, the storm howls and the snow drives against the world, but within these walls the bird lays runes upon our tongues, awakening memory. Old colors burn anew, forgotten faces smile again. The room glows as though lit by Christmas candles. The evening feels holy, and the heart feels young. The storm rages. It has power. It is lord of the hour, but not our lord. For we have warmth, we have light, we have song. Once more, it is wintertime. The wind cuts like a blade from elfin forges, and the snow keeps falling, day after day, week after week, until the great city lies buried, like a dream beneath white silence. Streets and spires vanish under the drifts. Only the golden cross atop the church tower gleams above the sea of snow, bright against the blue sky when the sun breaks through. It is the sign of faith, the promise that even beneath death-like sleep, life endures. And over the town fly the birds of heaven. They circle and cry in their many tongues. First come the sparrows, small, bustling, full of chatter. They flit through alleys and chimneys, gossiping about every crumb and corner. "We know that buried town," they chirp. "Every soul down there talks and worries just as we do. Cheap, cheap, cheap." Then come the ravens and crows, dark as judgment, croaking over the whiteness below. "Dig, dig," they cry. There's still something to be found there, something to fill the belly. That is what matters most. And their harsh caw echoes the thoughts of many who walk the earth. But at last, above them all, the wild swans descend, majestic, gleaming, their wings slicing the air with solemn grace. They sing of the glory that still lives within human hearts, though buried under winter's slumber. Their song swells, deep and resonant, like an organ's tone within a cathedral, like the echo of a Valkyrie's flight, like the voices of heroes calling from their mounds. The harmony rises, and the soul listens. It pierces the clouds and touches heaven. For in that moment, we hear again the Bird of Folklore. Then, as if in answer, the warm breath of God moves over the land. The snow mountain cracks, sunlight pours through, and the long dream of winter begins to waken. The rivers stir, the branches glisten with tears of thaw, and from every hidden nest comes life renewed. The year begins again, and still, through it all, the bird sings, the bird that never dies. Its melody is the memory of mankind, carried from age to age, from tongue to tongue. It sings through storm and springtime alike, until even silence becomes a song.